Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Matthew Hoffman. Matthew Hoffman was born on November 1, 1980. Little is known about his childhood, but he was probably a quiet and somewhat withdrawn child who was loved by his parents. Although there may have been some strange traits in his behavior, they did not indicate that Matthew was a danger to others. He was very fond of plants, especially leaves. Matthew was a loner with no friends, and many people thought he was strange, even suspecting that he might have mental problems. He graduated from high school, but did not pursue further education. After getting a job as a plumber's assistant in Colorado, Matthew, with no friends or acquaintances to help him, secretly stayed in a corner of one of his clients' apartments while they were away. When he learned that the landlord was returning, instead of cleaning up and leaving, he set fire to the apartment to hide his presence. Matthew was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he only served 6 years and was released early for good behavior. In 2009, after returning to his hometown in Ohio, he bought a small house. He began dating a woman who had a young son from a previous relationship. Things went well for a while, as they all lived together until late 2010. Matthew's neighbors noticed a sudden change in his behavior. Previously, he enjoyed playing with the neighborhood kids and his girlfriend's son. However, he recently became irritable and angry. His girlfriend was fed up with this behavior, so she packed up and moved out of his house with her son. As a result, Matthew's situation worsened, and he lost his part-time job as a tree trimmer. The reason he was fired was that he was not doing a good job. Instead of working, he would sit in a tree for hours, staring into space. After losing his job, he began to live more frugally. A neighbor reported that he turned off the lights in his entire house to save on bills. He then built a platform in one of the trees on his property and spent hours sitting there, watching the neighborhood. Neighbors advised their children not to play outside while Matthew was in the tree, as they found his behavior very disturbing. He would sometimes catch and kill squirrels, cook them, and eat them, which one neighbor believed was because he had no money and could not afford food. A few weeks after breaking up with his girlfriend, she returned to collect the last of their belongings. They had a heated argument that escalated, and Matthew attempted to strangle her. Although she initially filed a lawsuit, she changed her mind and dropped the case a few days later. In November 2010, Matthew began behaving strangely and was found stealing various items. He soon developed a new hobby of breaking into homes in his small town. One house that caught his attention was located in the suburbs near a wooded area. He spent a lot of time in the trees watching the house. The occupants of the house included 32-year-old Tina Herman, her 2 children, 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, and 11-year-old Cody Maynard, and her boyfriend. The garage door was not properly locked, allowing Matthew easy access. Although there are neighboring houses, they are far enough away that no one can see or hear anything unusual at night. On November 9, 2010, Matthew was in the woods when he saw Tina's boyfriend leave for work at the distribution center at 3 a.m. It was still dark, and he was supposed to be gone for at least the day. Matthew then noticed 2 children leaving for school, followed by Tina, who left at 9 a.m. Thinking that she was leaving for work, Matthew decided to pack his things and break into Tina's house through the garage. He spent the next few hours exploring the rooms and slowly gathering items to put in bags. Usually burglars are quick and take what they want before leaving. However, Matthew moved slowly around the house. When he heard a car approaching, he realized he might be spotted, so he quickly hid in the furthest room, which turned out to be Tina's bedroom. Tina Herman returned home after a walk with her friend Stephanie. They had the day off and had gone shopping together. When she got home, Tina took her bag into the bedroom to put away the things she had bought. In the meantime, Matthew hit her on the head with the handle of a large knife, causing her to flinch and scream. He then attacked her. Stephanie, Tina's friend, took the things she had bought out of the car to bring into the house. When she got inside, Matthew suddenly attacked her. She tried to escape, but he was faster and caught up with her. A dog lived in the house, and it started barking loudly during the chaos. Matthew eventually dealt with the dog. After the crime, instead of running away, Matthew dragged the two bodies into the bathroom. There, he started to process their bodies and place them in trash bags. After filling the bags, he carried them to Stephanie's car, which was parked nearby, and loaded them into the back of the car. After finishing, he returned to the house to clean up the scene. While inside, he heard Tina's children, Cody and Sarah, coming home from school, so he hid and waited for them to come in. Shortly after, Matthew attacked Cody. The boy tried to escape, but Matthew struck him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Sarah ran down the hall to her room and tried to close the door to keep Matthew from entering, but he broke it open. Instead of killing Sarah, he found an electrical cord in her room and tied her up. He then covered her head with a pillowcase, picked her up, and carried her into the kitchen, where he laid her on the floor. Sarah was silent for an hour, listening to Matthew handling the body Cody's and mumbling to himself. He then picked Sarah up, carried her outside, and placed her in the back seat of Stephanie's car, along with the body bags. After driving about a mile to his parking spot in a secluded area, Matthew carried Sarah into his car and drove home. When he arrived, he locked her in the bathroom after gagging her. He then went back to Stephanie's parking lot to hide the garbage bags containing the body parts. He returned to his house, where he found himself exhausted and falling asleep. But before he fell asleep, he tied Sarah to him with a rope to prevent her from escaping. While Matthew slept, Sarah looked around the house and saw something strange. The floors and walls were covered with leaves, and there were bags filled with leaves scattered all over the house. When Matthew woke up, he decided to move Sarah to the basement, a small corner used for storage. He placed a blanket inside, put a pile of leaves on the ground, chained her up, and gagged her again. Matthew planned to go back to Tina's house to burn it, because he couldn't clean up the blood at the scene. He drove Stephanie's car to Tina's house and parked it in the garage. He then took Tina's pickup truck and went to his house to get a gas tank to burn it. However, the pickup broke down on the way. Not knowing what to do, Matthew abandoned the car in the university parking lot and walked home. The basement where Sarah was held was cold, dark, and damp. She was constantly freezing and had no choice but to lie down or sit because of the low ceilings. Matthew provided her with spoiled food and prevented her from using the bathroom. He wrapped a garbage bag around her waist to serve as a makeshift diaper and did not allow her to clean herself. The next day, Tina and Stephanie's co-workers noticed that they did not show up for work, raising concerns. Tina's supervisor went to her home and discovered that Tina's pickup truck was missing. Looking through the window, she saw an unusual mess inside the house. The employee eventually broke the window to enter the house, where she discovered a significant amount of blood and immediately called the police. When the police arrived and searched the house, they found no one there. The officers discovered that the children had not attended school that day. Inside the house, although no bodies were found, there was a significant amount of blood in almost every room. The investigation was aided by the discovery of empty trash bags in the house, which contained receipts for items purchased at a hardware store. Officers took this information to the store and requested video footage from a specific date and time. Although the man who made the purchase was not clearly visible in the footage, they were able to track him as he walked to his car, identifying it as a Toyota. At the same time, a search was underway for Tina's missing pickup truck, which was eventually found in the university parking lot. Inside the truck, police found empty gas cans. The police then gathered all the evidence and focused their search on the drivers of Toyotas. Ironically, Matthew's driver's license had a picture of him wearing the same shirt seen in the store footage, leading to his identification. The police deployed a special weapons and tactics team to Matthew's home. When they entered, Matthew, who was asleep on the couch and unaware of the situation, did not resist and was taken into custody without incident. After the arrest, the police conducted a search of Matthew's home and found Sarah in the basement. She was lying on a pile of leaves, tied up, but still alive. The police were shocked by the state of Matthew's home, which was littered with leaves, bags of leaves hanging from the walls, and the floor covered in leaves. In the living room, there was a pile of leaves, large enough to raise suspicions about what might be hidden underneath, especially given the disappearances of Stephanie, Tina, and Cody. Despite the chaos of the scene, the police found no evidence of a crime. They discovered strange and seemingly meaningless drawings on the doors and kitchen walls. The refrigerator contained the bodies of beavers and squirrels. When questioned, Matthew remained calm and quiet. He claimed the murders were the result of a botched burglary. Matthew intended to steal valuables and was surprised when Tina and Stephanie returned home. In a panic, he killed them. The police rejected the initial account, asserting that the crime was premeditated. Matthew found that the garage was open and that in the morning, everyone had left the house. Near the property, they found a sleeping bag and a burned area under a tree, which showed signs of having been climbed multiple times for a better view. They also found large bags of trash in the garage, along with a receipt indicating that Matthew had purchased them a week before the murders. Prosecutors pointed out that burglars typically do not linger in homes for hours. They take what they need and leave quickly. The police asked Matthew where he had hidden the victims. Initially, Matthew refused to reveal the location of the bodies, which led to a deal being struck. Facing the death penalty for his crimes, he was promised a reduced sentence if he disclosed the location of the bodies. Although he initially resisted, Matthew eventually wrote a confession and agreed to lead the police to the scene. He took them to a large tree in the reserve, where he had created a hollow at the top, accessible only by climbing equipment. Inside, the police discovered large plastic garbage bags filled with body parts. Matthew also requested that the police not damage the tree, as he believed it was sacred. However, the tree was cut down. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman pleaded guilty to the murders of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, as well as to the abuse of their bodies. He also pleaded guilty to kidnapping and abusing Sarah for 4 days. As a result, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah faced many challenges but remained strong and played a key role in the investigation, receiving praise from the police for her courage. She wanted the opportunity to speak at Matthew's sentencing to confront him directly. However, she was advised against doing so. After losing her mother and brother, she moved in with her father and stepmother. Sarah later wrote a book called Girl in the Leaves. When Sarah turned 16, her father and stepmother were charged with assaulting her. A protective order was issued, and Sarah moved in with another relative. Not much has been heard from her since then, but she is safe and well. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Riley Whitelaw. Riley Whitelaw was born on January 20th, 2005 in Colorado Springs, El Paso County, USA, the only child of Courtney, a single mother. From an early age, Riley demonstrated kindness, empathy, and respect for others. Her bright smile brought warmth and joy to everyone around her. Riley loves to draw and wants to learn to play the guitar. After attending the Air Force Academy, she proved herself to be an excellent student. Among her classmates, she was known for her calm demeanor, confidence, and leadership skills. When Riley was a teenager, her mother met a man named Chris Johnson. Their relationship quickly developed into love, leading to the decision to marry. Riley, who always wanted the best for her mother, did her best to adapt to the changes Chris brought to their home. Chris, who never had the opportunity to be a father, welcomed Riley with open arms and treated her like his own daughter, expressing that he felt lucky to be a part of her life. In 2021, Riley is 16 years old, she is more mature, and gets a part-time job at a branch of an American company that operates the second-largest pharmacy chain in the country. This pharmacy not only sells medicines and healthcare products but also provides photography services. Riley only works 2 days a week because she still has to continue her studies. Despite her busy schedule, she feels happy and enthusiastically accepts the challenge. At first, everything goes smoothly. Riley enjoys her job and always completes her tasks. She quickly gains the appreciation of customers and builds good relationships with her colleagues. Among Riley's co-workers is a man named Joshua Johnson. Not much is known about his background, but he is in his 30s and has just been released from prison. The appearance of Riley, a young girl at the pharmacy, changes his life. Joshua, who is withdrawn and hot-tempered, is Riley's complete opposite. Despite their differences, Joshua develops feelings for her. Everyone around him notices this and realizes his unusual intentions, considering Riley's age. However, he insists that he will wait until she is an adult before asking her out. Joshua cannot hide his feelings for Riley for long and begins to show his attention to her, trying to win her over. He eventually openly confesses his love for her. However, Riley does not have feelings for him. After being rejected, Joshua becomes hurt and begins to act out, trying to hurt Riley whenever possible. During a class where he is supposed to teach her and another coworker about how to work in a photo lab, he completely ignores her. This behavior frustrates Riley, as it negatively affects the quality of her work. Joshua refuses to answer her questions or offer any help. Initially, Riley was upset and often reflected on Joshua's behavior toward her, wondering what she had done to deserve such negative treatment. However, over time, Joshua crossed the line. First, he touched her inappropriately. And then he slapped her. Riley felt both angry and offended by these actions. She realized that Joshua was invading her and her personal space. Riley chose to speak up about the incident. Gathering her courage, she informed the pharmacy manager, Justin Sunni, about what had happened. Justin helped to remind Joshua. Joshua remained silent and pretended to understand. Nothing else was done to protect Riley. Not wanting to worry her mother, Riley decides to keep the meeting between her, Joshua, and her manager Justin a secret. However, she still shared with Courtney the impact Joshua's behavior had had on her. For a while, they barely worked together, and Riley tried to forget about the incident. However, when she decided to increase her hours, she found herself scheduled to work the same shift as Joshua. In early 2020, she met Jacob Lee, who was 2 years older than her. As their relationship developed, they decided to date. Suddenly, Jacob decided to work part-time at the pharmacy, just like Riley. In early spring 2022, Jacob started working, allowing them to spend more time together. Like Riley, Jacob quickly became friends with all the employees, except Joshua. Although there were no major conflicts between them, Joshua always seemed uncomfortable whenever they had to work together. Jacob wasn't the only one who noticed. The second manager, Crystal Ismail, also noticed that Joshua was jealous of Jacob because he was Riley's boyfriend. Joshua saw Jacob as his rival. Joshua still didn't give up on his love and continued to try to get closer to Riley. Feeling frustrated by his harassment, Riley finally asked for a change in her working hours. After a while, Riley needed more money and wanted to work overtime. Her boss informed her that she would have to work the same shift as Joshua because she had no other choice. Riley shared her concerns with Jacob. Riley shares her concerns with Jacob, but he doesn't take her words seriously and doesn't realize the severity of the situation. This disappoints Riley. On June 11th, 2022, Riley was at the pharmacy where Crystal was in charge of management, and everything was going smoothly. Although Joshua was on the same shift as Riley, he took advantage of his co-worker's distraction to enter the break room. First, he placed a busy sign on the bathroom door, then blocked the view of one of the surveillance cameras with containers, and finally taped the window. The exact details of what happened next remain unclear, but when it was time for Riley's break, she entered the break room where Joshua was hiding, ready to put her plan into action. At approximately 5:44 p.m., surveillance camera footage captured a customer named Alicia Shanky in the store when she heard a woman scream. Seconds later, she heard the door close, but Alicia ignored it. She made her purchase and left the store. Meanwhile, in the break room, Joshua attacked Riley with a knife, and the attack was both quick and brutal, and Riley died instantly. Crystal, the store manager, becomes concerned when Riley does not return to work after her break and becomes even more suspicious when she notices that Joshua is also missing. She quickly goes outside the door where the trash can is. As she approaches, she sees someone's bare feet and, feeling scared, she rushes back to the pharmacy, locking the front desk door to prevent anyone from entering. This allows Joshua to dispose of Riley's blood-stained items in the trash without being seen. He then returns home. A few minutes later, Crystal mustered up the courage and went outside again, but the person was gone. Unable to find Riley, she decided to contact the manager, Justin. She also called Jacob, but he had no information on Riley's location. Justin then went to the pharmacy to investigate the situation. It was a little after 6 p.m. when he arrived. When he arrived, he quickly began reviewing the surveillance camera footage and saw Riley walking towards the break room. In an earlier recording, he noticed Joshua stacking boxes and containers to block the camera's view. Justin walked into the break room, quickly opened the door, and turned on the lights. He was horrified to see blood everywhere. And in the corner of the room, he found Riley's body. Shocked, Justin called the police at 6:05 p.m. 10 minutes later, officers arrived at the pharmacy, where they discovered Riley's body. She was found on the floor with her badge and headphones nearby. In addition to the severe neck injury, she had suffered several other injuries. Alicia, a customer at the pharmacy during the day, passed by the scene that evening and noticed police and patrol cars. She stopped to report the screams she had heard earlier. Police officers Steve Alonso and Mike Lee began their investigation. Meanwhile, someone informed Riley's mother, Courtney, of the tragic news. The distraught mother rushed to the pharmacy and was stunned when she arrived at the crime scene. When asked by police if she knew anyone who Riley's enemies were or who might have committed such an act, Courtney did not remember Joshua. She believed her daughter was the victim of a robbery and did not know that her daughter was actually murdered by a coworker. Police collected evidence at the crime scene and sent the body for forensic examination. The Riley had 42 stab wounds, and there were similar injuries on her hands, suggesting she attempted to defend herself. Experts concluded that she died from a lack of oxygen. Joshua fled the city early in the morning but was stopped by a patrol officer as he headed toward the New Mexico border. The officer was unaware of his actions and arrested him based solely on his appearance, as his face was covered in cuts, scrapes, and bruises. When asked about his injuries, Joshua claimed that he had been attacked in a store in Colorado Springs. However, when the patrol officer contacted Colorado Springs police, they discovered that Joshua was actually the suspect in Riley's murder and not the victim. Afterwards, he was arrested and brought back to the city. Currently, the pharmacy's representatives are not making any statements to the media. Police have denied permission to share information that might disrupt the ongoing investigation. The pharmacy has closed its doors and is no longer serving customers. Nearby, the community has set up a makeshift memorial for Riley, adorning it with numerous flowers, letters, and gifts from those who are grieving. Joshua admitted during his initial police interview that he was in love with Riley. He admitted to being in the break room with her but claimed that the incident was accidental. This confession led police to identify him as the person who had been near Crystal at the dumpster. Despite the evidence against him, Joshua maintained his innocence and denied obstructing the view of the security camera. Police later discovered his DNA on the murder weapon. After obtaining a court warrant to search his home, they found a black hoodie with blood and traces of DNA belonging to Riley. Joshua was charged with first-degree murder and held without bail in El Paso County, with his trial scheduled for June 2022. Riley's funeral was held on June 23, 2022. Her mother received many letters of support from classmates, pharmacy customers, and others. On November 15, 2022, Joshua pleaded not guilty to all charges at his preliminary hearing. The trial was originally scheduled to begin on March 6, 2023, but the defense requested additional time to prepare and requested that Joshua undergo a mental health evaluation to determine whether he was competent to stand trial. As a result, the trial was postponed. The evaluation later determined that Joshua was sane. He remains in custody at the El Paso County Jail, with bail set at $10 million. In late September 2023, after all attempts to postpone the trial, Joshua finally appeared in court and faced Riley's relatives. On the first day of the trial, the prosecutor explained to the jury that Joshua and Riley both worked at a pharmacy and detailed the events that took place there. The defense maintained that Joshua happened to be at the crime scene. They presented that Joshua entered the break room and found Riley lying on the floor. At that point, he was attacked by an unknown assailant, causing him to flee for safety, despite feeling guilty for leaving Riley behind. However, witness testimonies have made it clear that Joshua's account is incorrect. One of the longest testimonies came from Justin, who discovered the body and was the pharmacy manager that first contacted the police. The prosecutor's office also called Riley's mother, Courtney, to testify. She shared insights about her daughter, describing her as someone who loved to help others. Courtney mentioned that Riley had expressed concerns about Joshua's behavior on several occasions. She recalled one incident when Riley was working with Joshua in the photo services area, where he touched her inappropriately. This led Riley to speak with her supervisors, resulting in her being allowed to change her work schedule. In October 2023, after arguments from both the prosecution and defense had concluded, after an hour of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Joshua Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder. The judge expressed gratitude to everyone who contributed to achieving justice, especially the Colorado Springs police. After the trial, some expressed their anger toward Joshua, while others chose to remember Riley as a kind, young girl who tragically lost her life because of his actions. On the podium in the auditorium, there were 3 items: an empty vase, a bag containing 42 purple stones, and a small bouquet of sunflowers. Riley's loved ones had brought these items on purpose. The stones represented the number of wounds Riley had suffered. Each person giving a speech took a handful of stones and put them in a vase. The 9th and final speaker was her mother, Courtney. She wore a jacket with the insignia of the National Guard, where her daughter served. Despite her deep grief, Courtney spoke very strongly that she would not let Joshua, whom she called a monster, take away her love for her late daughter. People admired her for this, considering it her greatest strength. She emphasized that her daughter was never afraid to express her opinion when things were not going well and always confidently led others. At the end of her speech, Courtney placed the sunflowers in a vase containing 42 purple stones before returning to her seat. At the end of the hearing, Joshua Johnson was sentenced to life in prison. Courtney established a memorial fund in Riley's name, which provides scholarships to high school graduates. In the future, Courtney plans to organize charity events that she believes Riley would have enjoyed, including art nights, exhibitions, and running. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sandra Garner. Sandra and John met in the 1990s in the small town of Paris, Texas, which has a population of around 20,000. They worked together at a packaging company and quickly formed a close relationship, which developed into a romantic relationship. Sandra is 13 years older than John and has been through a divorce. She has 2 children from that marriage, Wes and Andrea. Although they appeared happy, their relationship faced many difficulties from the beginning. After dating for 2 years, they decided to get married. John became stepfather to Sandra's children, Wes and Andrea, and is also a husband who deeply loves his wife. They were married on January 1, 2000, in Las Vegas. John appears to be a friendly and sociable person, well liked by most people. However, those who knew him closely were aware of his struggles with alcohol. When he drank, he sometimes lost control and became aggressive. Additionally, he dealt with mental health issues and was on antidepressants. John worked as the HR manager, responsible for hiring and firing employees. He especially enjoys firing people, which leads many to think that he enjoys the power he has over others. Overall, John was a caring person who loved his family. After the wedding, his life seemed to get better, thanks to the sincere love between him and his wife, Sandra. They felt very compatible and quickly got along with their children, especially little Wes. However, Andrea did not like John, her stepfather. This is a normal psychological reaction of most children when they do not want to accept their parents' new partner, and it usually requires time to adapt. In 2014, Sandra started experiencing health issues and was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which greatly complicated her daily life. This has changed their family life a lot. John had to do the housework and take care of Sandra. During this time, she tried to work remotely to help out financially. He willingly supported her, helping her with daily tasks and providing emotional support. As a result, Andrea witnessed the love between her parents and began to empathize with John. The relationship between Andrea and John improved. She started helping John with more housework and taking care of Sandra. This brought their family closer. Unfortunately, Sandra's health continued to decline. She faced ongoing struggles with her illness, impacting both her physical and emotional well-being. The medication she took provided only partial relief, alleviating some symptoms but leaving her feeling emotionally suppressed. At times, she found herself searching online for ways to end her life, feeling overwhelmed by depression. During those times, she confided in John about her thoughts and expressed her worries about being a burden to him. John reassured her, saying that if she were to die, he would not want to continue living either. This conversation made Sandra realize that she could not leave her children without a parent. In that moment, John became her reason for living. As Sandra's health deteriorated, she decided to leave her job because she was unable to work, either in the office or from home. This meant that John was the only one earning money to support the family, causing further financial hardship. Even so, John showed no signs that he was stressed. He always supported his wife and children, was always by their side, and tried his best to help. In 2016, the family moved to a small town called Mai Sang, about 50 kilometers south of Taoist, in Alice County. With a population of less than 1,000, Mai Sang is a friendly and cozy community. They loved it so much that they decided to buy a house there. John and Sandra have good relationships with both families. This was proven when John's relatives moved into a new house right across from theirs. They frequently organized joint events and celebrated holidays together. The backyard of John and Sandra's house became a gathering place for everyone. By this time, their children, Wes and Andrea, had moved out and were living independently. Sandra continued to battle her illness, but the family seemed to be doing fine, at least until 2018. On January 1st, they were set to celebrate their 18th wedding anniversary. They planned to have dinner at a restaurant and invited Sandra's son, Wes, to join them, while Andrea was away on a trip and could not attend. Wes arrived for the celebration and left around 7 p.m. Typically, Sandra and John went to bed early, around 9 or 10 o'clock, and that night was no exception. However, a terrible tragedy struck later that night. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, the 911 operator received a call from Sandra. She said she needed help and asked for both the police and an ambulance, as her husband John had been attacked. According to her, an intruder had entered their home, attacked her husband, and then forced her into the bathroom. There, the assailant ordered her to count to 100, threatening to kill her if she did not obey. She complied with his demands. Sandra told the dispatcher that her husband John was wheezing and likely still alive, and she requested help. The dispatcher provided instructions for performing artificial respiration, and she followed. Fishers were dispatched immediately, but it took them about 15 minutes to arrive. When they entered the house, they heard Sandra calling for help from the bedroom. There, on the floor, lay her husband, whom she had pulled from the bed to administer artificial respiration. One of the officers checked John's body. He was still warm, but showed no signs of life. It seemed he was still alive when Sandra called asking for help. Unfortunately, John did not survive until the authorities arrived. The medical team confirmed that he was dead. The officers then suspected that the attacker might still be in the house, so they conducted a thorough search but found no one else present. The killer had already escaped. Meanwhile, Sandra was in shock and began to have a hysterical reaction to the situation. As a result, she was unable to communicate with the police initially and required assistance. Medical personnel had to help calm her down, while detectives and forensic experts arrived to carefully examine the crime scene and collect evidence. Around 2 a.m., Sandra regained consciousness and was taken to the police station for questioning. The police checked to see if her hands were stained with gunpowder and determined whether she was the person who attacked John or not. Forensic experts photographed the crime scene, collected the clothes she wore before the police arrived, and interviewed an important witness who could describe the attacker. The police hoped she could provide useful information to the detectives. However, her illness made it hard for her to focus. Even so, she made an effort to assist with the investigation. Sandra explained that she and John had gone to bed together before the attack occurred. Everything happened so quickly that she didn't fully comprehend what was happening or see the attacker clearly. She was overwhelmed with fear. She recalled being awakened by a gunshot around 12:45 a.m., followed by a second shot. In the bedroom, she saw a man with a flashlight and a gun jump from the bed to the floor. She hid and screamed, hoping someone would hear her and come to help. The intruder was wearing a blue sweatshirt and jeans, a mask, and was much taller than she was. Sandra pleaded with her attacker not to kill her. He responded that he was there to take revenge on John and meant her no harm. He explained that he had been working hard at the company where John worked, but he was fired several years ago, which led to him losing his home and ruining his life. This grudge against John was the reason for his actions. Then demanded to see the safe. Sandra led him to the closet, where the reflections from the metal door allowed her to get a better look at him. She tried to get a better look at him, but he threatened to kill her if she did so. Fearful, she turned away and stopped trying to look at him. Then, he opened the safe and handed over the money, which she estimated to be around $18,000. She couldn't provide an exact figure since it had been a long time since she last counted it, but she was confident that it was $18,000. The police had no way to verify this, so they had to take her word. After taking the money, The attacker ordered her to go to the bathroom and count to 100. The interrogation lasted several hours, after which the police allowed Sandra to return home. By then, her family had gathered to support her during this difficult time. She needed them now more than ever. She was deeply saddened by what had happened. However, some family members doubted her sincerity. Many people noticed her strange behavior immediately after she spoke to the police. She returned to her house, even though the attacker might return, as if she was not worried about the incident. In fact, Sandra seemed to be hoping the man would come back so she could attack him. Meanwhile, her family arrived at her son Wes's house and informed him that John had been killed. He was shocked and immediately went to the police station to report the incident. What was strange was that he did this before going to visit his mother. He did not even call her to ask about the situation. Later, the police understood Wes's actions. He had something important to share with them. From the very first sentence, he confirmed to the police that he believed the murder was committed by his own mother, Sandra. However, he felt very embarrassed to say this because it was difficult to give testimony against the closest relative. He was skeptical that an intruder could have entered their home unnoticed, even though his parents had 2 dogs. These dogs should have barked to warn of danger. His statements puzzled the police. During the initial interrogation, Sandra's testimony was so clear and convincing that the police had no doubts about her. However, Wes maintained that his mother could have killed John, prompting the police to consider this possibility. Police thoroughly searched the entire crime scene, including the main house and several outbuildings like a garage and a barn. In the garage, they discovered Sandra's Ford Mustang. They were looking for her self-defense pistol, which Wes mentioned was usually kept in her purse but is sometimes hidden under the seat of the vehicle. Unfortunately, they could not locate the weapon. In the house, police discovered a total of 49 pistols and 10 rifles. All of these weapons belonged to John, a gun enthusiast who did not know how to store them safely. These weapons are kept all over the house, suggesting that John wanted a gun to be ready for use in emergency situations. This indicated that he might have feared an attack from enemies. However, one notable weapon was missing from his collection: a Taurus .38 revolver registered to Sandra. It is possible that the revolver was lost, stolen, or misplaced. Additionally, a small amount of gunpowder residue was found on her hand, which could have come from accidental circumstances, such as being near her husband John when he was killed. Besides, during cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Sandra touched her husband. The amount of gunpowder residue on her hands was minimal, suggesting she might have come into contact with it after the murder. Initially, she may have had more gunpowder traces, but they may have been deleted during the move. Although this evidence was circumstantial, it was quite suspicious, leading to her becoming a suspect in her husband's murder. During the investigation, police decided to examine Sandra and John's tablets and mobile phones. These devices were confiscated to analyze their messages and internet searches. Investigators discovered that Sandra was conducting very suspicious searches, including searching for fentanyl and other powerful drugs. Even more troubling, shortly before John's death, she had searched for methods to kill someone and ways to conceal a crime. However, these searches are not enough to definitely confirm her malicious intentions, as they are mixed with normal searches. Still, they raise suspicion. On January 4, 2018, police investigated the possibility that Sandra was involved in John's murder. The only issue was that they had yet to locate her gun. Officers consulted her son, Wes. He suggested that if he were searching for the gun, he would check his mother's car. Consequently, police decided to conduct a more thorough search of the car and garage. When the detectives arrived at Sandra's house, they found that the garage was locked. They asked Wes to open the door for them, and he went to see his mother. He had asked her to give him a spare key so the police could get into the garage. However, she was visibly terrified. She insisted that she would not let the officers in, demanding that they leave immediately. All those who witnessed this gesture were shocked. Her reaction left them feeling strange. Previously, she had communicated openly with the police and was willing to help in the investigation. However, on that day, she had a very strong reaction. Initially, Sandra expressed disappointment with her relatives because they suspected her of guilt. Afterward, she left the house and went to her garage in an attempt to stop the officers from searching. However, her efforts were in vain. The police informed her that they would conduct a search, even if she did not want it. If she refused to provide the key, they would break down the door, since they had a warrant. Consequently, she had no choice but to comply and unlock the garage. When they got in, they immediately checked under the driver's seat of the Mustang. There they found a grocery bag containing a paper towel that wrapped a rusty .38 caliber revolver. This suggests that during the initial search, the weapon was hidden elsewhere, and she later returned it to its usual location. This is absolutely certain because the police team that conducted the previous search was present at the scene again. Sandra was likely very nervous and reluctant to let the police into the garage. The investigators questioned Wes again, and he claimed to have seen Sandra put the murder weapon in her car after the police had left. However, she denied this accusation. It was puzzling because she had no motive to kill her beloved husband, who had always cared for her. The detectives decided to question Sandra again, not just as a witness, but as a suspect in her husband's brutal murder. They made it clear they suspected her of the crime. They pressured her, accusing her of lying and trying to obstruct the investigation. Although she was visibly upset and denied any involvement in the crime, her emotional response seemed sincere. She confirmed that there were no weapons hidden in her car. She was emotional at the time and could not provide any further information. Experts analyzed the flight path of the bullet from the gun used in the case. They determined that the shots were fired from the revolver found in the car, and the bullets collected matched this weapon. However, no fingerprints or DNA from Sandra were found on the revolver, indicating that it could have been used by anyone. Despite this, she could still be arrested and charged, but it would take more evidence to build a full case. The police went to arrest Sandra at her home, but she was not there, so they waited for her to return. When she drove up in her car, she was surprised to find herself immediately arrested. John's family watched from the windows of a nearby house. As the police handcuffed the family members of John erupted in applause. They feel grateful that justice was finally served and believe that she was the one who shot John. Sandra was taken into custody and her bail was set at $2 million, an amount she could not afford. As a result, she remained in prison for a long time. On March 21, 2018, Sandra Garner was officially charged with the murder of her husband, John. She spent a year and a half in prison, which took a severe toll on her health. When she appeared in court in September 2019 in Waxahachie, Texas, she looked very unwell. It seemed that the situation had drained her of her remaining energy. She appeared physically worn out and emotionally exhausted. From the outset, the prosecutor's office believed they had strong reasons and sufficient evidence to convict her. However, as the prosecution's case progressed, it became increasingly clear that Sandra might avoid punishment, as the evidence against her was largely circumstantial. One of the key witnesses in this case is Sandra's son, Wes. He actively sought to push the investigation forward, even implicating his own mother. Wes confidently claimed that the weapon should be in the car, despite the fact that investigators found it was not there previously. Typically, someone who shares such detailed information about a crime raises suspicions of their involvement. This led many to wonder, did Wes want John, his stepfather, dead? Did he orchestrate the incident to have Sandra, his sick mother, arrested instead of facing consequences himself. When investigators looked closely at Wes, they discovered several troubling issues. He was able to kill John because he had access to the entire house and knew where the gun was hidden. Investigators discovered that the suspicious online searches only occurred on nights when Wes visited his parents, John and Sandra, after they had gone to bed. Tablet searches can be traced back to Wes in the first place. He seemed determined to make his mother, Sandra, pay for this crime, and even implied that she had a weapon. Wes's alibi was highly questionable. He claimed that he was at home watching videos on his laptop at the time of the crime, but no one could verify this. He lived alone. And during the initial investigation, the police overlooked a crucial detail. His laptop was set to a different time zone. Additionally, Wes can set the video to play continuously while he is absent, meaning he had no real alibi. Furthermore, John had a motive, as he was named in John's will, and might have wanted to access his inheritance quickly. In contrast, Sandra had no reason to want John dead. John was a significant part of her life and had cared for her during her illness for many years. He is the only one who earns money to support the family, and they live in harmony and attached together. During the trial, it was highlighted that the police had failed to act professionally. It took them 15 minutes to get to the crime scene. The police who conducted the investigation that night were inexperienced, as they had never been involved in a criminal investigation before. This led to some serious mistakes. In addition, the police needed to use special bags to preserve traces of gunpowder on Sandra's hands, but they did not do so. Photos taken at the crime scene on a police officer's mobile phone were later accidentally deleted and could not be recovered. The officers also did not conduct thorough interrogations of former employees at John's workplace, although Sandra said that the killer was fired from John's company, and from then on, he developed hatred towards John. The police only conducted interviews with a few witnesses, and they prioritized questioning John's family. Consequently, the prosecutor had to address the defense's claims about the police's lack of competence. There have been numerous investigations into police misconduct, and those found to be at fault were disciplined. The prosecutor needed to clarify why the police did not collect fingerprints from the door handle of the Mustang where the revolver was discovered. Forensic experts might have found a fingerprint belonging to another suspect, the person who hid the weapon. If that person was really Wes, he could have entered the house without making the dog bark because they recognized him. However, there were uncertainties. Sandra cannot recognize her son Wes's eyes or voice. She said she felt very scared at the time, and due to her illness, it was difficult for her to concentrate. As a result, she overlooked many details and did not fully understand who she was speaking to, and Wes could have altered his voice during their conversation. During the trial, Sandra asserted that her son, Wes, was responsible for the murder of her husband, John. She noted that all evidence pointed to Wes, and he even hid her gun and tried to arrange everything to blame her. Recently, she had observed his suspicious behavior and noted that he had become distant from John, with whom they had previously been friendly. To verify her claims, a cross-examination was conducted. This process can help prove innocence, but it carries risks. Even small mistakes in her answers can sway the jury against them. She has difficulty during this interrogation process, providing inconsistent answers and leaving many gaps in her story. She believes the cause was confusion and health issues, which may have left the jury unconvinced. The prosecution presented over 400 pieces of evidence and interviewed 25 witnesses, leading them to believe that Sandra would be found guilty of her husband's murder, John. However, when it was the defense's turn, they successfully refuted the prosecution's arguments and pointed out the negligence in the investigation process. They point out that initially, Wes was not considered a suspect. There was no testing for gunpowder residue on his hands, no polygraph examination, and no thorough investigation of his alibi. When the jury began deliberating, many thought it would be a long one. However, they returned a verdict after just a few hours. In the late afternoon, when the court announced the verdict, all of Sandra's family gathered in the courtroom to hear the decision. The jury found her innocent, bringing her immense relief. Overcome with emotion, she cried and embraced her lawyers. After serving 21 months in prison, she was finally free to go home. However, this news upset her son, Wes, and John's family. They believed that she was responsible for John's death and expected her to be sentenced to prison. The relationship between John's family and Sandra's family became strained, and this eventually forced his family to move away. Now, Sandra believes that Wes was the one who killed John. Sandra's relationship with her son, Wes, has deteriorated greatly. After the trial, they completely stopped communicating. Sandra's daughter, Andrea, continues to support she and believes in her innocence. The police have not closed the case, and for a while, they focused on Wes as the main suspect in the murder. However, valuable time has been lost. Many clues were lost, and many things were not done in time. As a result, it is now nearly impossible to definitively prove anyone's guilt. Evidence related to this case has been stored for years, and no one has taken the initiative to investigate further. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Lorenzo Ahmed Gonzalez. Lorenzo Ahmed Gonzalez, born on November 29, 2001, is the second child of Ana Cacho Gonzalez and her husband, Ahmed Ali Gonzalez. Lorenzo was an active and energetic child, and his family noticed his passion for sports from an early age. Without hesitation, his parents enrolled him in a local soccer academy through his participation in sports. Lorenzo became more cheerful and outgoing at that time. The boy's parents lived in Dorado, a city on the northern coast of Puerto Rico. About 20 kilometers west of San Juan, they resided in a popular residential area called Dorado del Mar. Unfortunately, Ahmed and Ana decided to separate, although the divorce was difficult. It seemed reasonable considering their frequent arguments. According to the agreement, their children would live with their mother, despite the circumstances. The children regularly visited their father and sometimes stayed with him from Friday to Monday. In general, things were stable, and everyone was satisfied with the current situation. On March 9, 2010, at around 6 a.m., Ana rushed to a city medical center, carrying her son, Lorenzo. This facility typically provides emergency care for critical situations. When she approached one of the staff members, she explained that her son had fallen out of bed at home and had suffered a serious head injury. However, the extent of Lorenzo's injuries resembled those resulting from a car accident, despite the doctor's best efforts. Lorenzo's condition was critical. His chest was severely deformed, and he had multiple head injuries. It seemed that he was no longer alive. The medical team attempted to resuscitate him, but unfortunately, all their efforts were unsuccessful. Finally, at around 6 a.m., Lorenzo was pronounced dead. Doctors at the medical facility tried to question Ana in more detail to understand how the boy had been so severely injured. Ana did not hesitate and share what she knows. What was particularly alarming was that when the doctor carefully examined Lorenzo's body, dried blood was found on his wounds. This indicated that the blood had been outside the child's body for a long time, suggesting that Ana had brought him to the hospital much later than she had reported. Furthermore, the severity and variety of the injuries could not have resulted from a single fall. Some of the injuries on the boy's face appeared to have been caused by a sharp object. There were many questions. Ana did not seem to know the circumstances surrounding her son's death, which was not surprising. However, her unusually calm demeanor raised suspicions about the situation. This may be why the medical center staff chose to notify the police and report the incident. The doctors informed Ana of their decision. Ana simply said that there was no need for that. She insisted that the doctors not contact the police, which surprised them and made them even more suspicious of her. despite her wishes. The doctors called the police about 10 minutes later. Several patrol cars with police and forensic experts arrived. Their first priority was to conduct a thorough autopsy on Lorenzo's body to determine the cause of death. They also needed to question Anna and her daughters, who had been at home during the incident. Anna recounted the first incident as follows. She said that she was sleeping in her room when she heard her youngest daughter scream. This terrified Anna, although she did not immediately understand what her daughter meant. She eventually went into the nursery, turned on the light, and found her son lying on the floor with blood flowing from his head. This sight left her completely paralyzed with fear. She admitted that she did not know what to do in such a crisis. She then woke her eldest daughter and told her to get Lorenzo's clothes and some other things. They rushed to the medical center. She also mentioned that, on the way to the hospital, she informed both Lorenzo's father, Ahmed, and her own biological parents about the incident. A few hours later, they all spoke to the police, who believed they were dealing with another tragic accident. Normally, inexperienced prosecutors are assigned to such cases in the country to allow young professionals to gain practical experience. However, this case was more complicated than it initially appeared. As a result, there were significant errors in the early stages of the investigation. It seems that these errors continued throughout the investigation, including the alleged flawed examination of the crime scene. When the prosecutors arrived at the scene, they did not collect any DNA or fingerprints, and the idea of searching for a suspect was not even considered. Rome, the expert who examined the scene, identified a bedsheet and a pillow. However, he ignored the mattress, which had a larger blood stain. He later defended his choice by saying that he only focused on objects that could have come into direct contact with Lorenzo's body, since the mattress was covered with a bedsheet. He chose not to examine it further. After this limited investigation, most forensic activities at the scene were halted. As a result, Lorenzo's mother, Anna, and his two sisters were allowed to return home that same day and resume their normal lives. This decision by the police raised many questions. Anna's father returned home to clean up everything to avoid reminding Anna and his nieces of the traumatic incident. He wanted them to feel comfortable in their room without any memory of this tragic loss. He disposed of the mattress in a city dump, claiming that the prosecutor had recommended this action. Moreover, the car Anna was driving belonged to her father and could contain evidence related to the events of that day, since the police had no plans to inspect the car. He could not be blamed for trying to hide any evidence. Lorenzo's family is anxiously awaiting the results of the autopsy to understand the cause of Lorenzo's death after the tragic event. They all claimed to have no involvement in what happened that day. Forensic experts noted that the injuries to Lorenzo's face were not consistent with those that would normally occur from a fall. Even a simple visual examination showed a clear difference. As a result, the case was quickly reclassified as a homicide. Lorenzo may have suffered a brain injury and a broken nose from a direct blow by a blunt object. Experts noted several stab wounds to the boy's face, suggesting that the injuries were inflicted by a knife or another sharp object. They also concluded that the attacker assaulted Lorenzo while he was lying down. In addition, experts determined that Lorenzo had died much earlier than the time indicated by the medical center due to the new findings from the autopsy. The police ordered a re-examination of the crime scene. By this time, the house had been cleared of virtually all evidence, including fingerprints and DNA, because of the thorough cleaning. The police could not rely on finding any physical evidence. Among the few notable items discovered was a pipe used to smoke illegal narcotics, which belonged to the boy's mother, Anna. While this did not affect the investigation, it tarnished Anna's reputation. Additionally, a small bag containing various documents that did not belong to any family members was found. Among the items in the bag were a toothbrush and toothpaste, along with papers belonging to a recently released prisoner, Luis Gustavo Rivera Sejo, a mentally ill criminal known as El Manco. The papers indicated that he had just been released, information that was quickly made public. This discovery made Luis the prime suspect immediately after the autopsy. Ana expressed her wish for Lorenzo's body to be cremated as soon as possible. However, his father, Ahmed, intervened. When he learned of her intentions, he contacted the police and stated that the boy should be buried in the traditional way instead of being cremated. He believes cremation will prevent any autopsies that might be necessary in the future. Ana's wish to cremate Lorenzo aroused the suspicions of the police, especially since the case was being investigated as a murder. Ana's actions appeared to indicate that she was trying to destroy potential evidence of her involvement. In the end, the police sided with Ahmed, and Lorenzo was buried according to custom, just days after Lorenzo was buried. The investigation took a new turn. Ana was summoned to the Prosecutor General's office for further questioning. Ana appeared with her lawyer, who advised her not to give any testimony. It is unclear whether this was the right advice, as by refusing to testify, Ana became one of the main suspects in Lorenzo's death. It seems that her legal team had their own strategy for handling the case and protecting her. After Ana refused to testify, her lawyers held a large press conference. They stated that their client believed she was innocent and felt insulted by being questioned as a suspect. In addition, her lawyer presented a version of events that had taken place after reviewing the statements from Ana's attorney. The police sought help from experienced colleagues at the FBI. When federal agents joined the investigation, they focused on Luis Gustavo Rivera Sejo. It was clear that his release from prison was a mistake or a failure of the justice system. This conclusion was based largely on information regarding his mental health. 2 weeks after Lorenzo's death, Luis was arrested by the police during the initial interrogation. Luis admitted to stealing a passerby's cell phone. He also mentioned being at a fast food restaurant near Lorenzo's house in the early morning of March 9. These statements reinforced suspicions that he may have been involved in the attack on Lorenzo, making him a suspect. Ana's daughters, who were present at the incident, were then required to give their statements to the police. Ana and her parents, however, strongly objected to this, arguing that it was unnecessary and merely a formality. Everyone understood that the police were unlikely to comply with Ana's wishes, and they continued to interview the girls. The police decided to temporarily separate the children from their family during the initial stages of the investigation to prevent Ana from pressuring her children not to cooperate. At the same time, the police launched a new investigation into a man named Jesus Genaro Camacho. Ana's boyfriend, several others, were also under investigation, including federal immigration agents William Marrero Rivera and Arnaldo Colon. The investigation revealed that these men allegedly visited Ana from the evening of March 8 to the morning of March 9, 2010, the day Lorenzo died. Shortly after the police began investigating these men, there was a small breakthrough in the case. This prompted Ana to cooperate with the police by providing a statement. Ana asserted that she had nothing to hide and did not know anyone who might be involved. Through her statement, she wanted to convey that she was not protecting anyone. The next day, Ana contacted the federal agents again. This time, she mentioned that she had forgotten to share some important details related to the investigation. She revealed that on the night of March 8 to March 9, she and William were at her home. She also noted that she had consumed alcohol and used illegal substances that day. According to her, the amount of alcohol and illegal substances was minimal and did not impair her ability to understand the situation. She clarified that she was not addicted to these substances and only used them occasionally to relax. This information was not new to the agents, especially since they had discovered both drugs and paraphernalia in Ana's home. However, she still had to undergo toxicology testing to determine the exact levels of these and other drugs in her system. Luis provided his own account of the events during an FBI officer's interrogation. He quickly confessed to his involvement in the crime. He said he entered the house by jumping over the wall, causing him to drop his bag containing documents and personal belongings. He then described the incident and some details surrounding the case. While in the kitchen, Luis grabbed a knife and used it to attack Lorenzo. He claimed that he attacked the boy because he thought Lorenzo had seen him enter the house. Luis admitted that he did not want to leave any witnesses to his actions, which is why he committed such a brutal act against the child. After the attack, he fled, claiming that he had spent the night in an abandoned house. He insisted that he had no intention of harming anyone and was just looking for a place to stay for the night. Believing that Lorenzo's family home appeared empty, his statements were quite contradictory, especially considering his severe mental health issues. After months of investigation, the FBI abruptly withdrew from the case without any results, leaving behind much of their work, including Luis's controversial confession. It is important to note that the local police were reluctant to take advantage of this confession and continued their investigation. There were no arrests or significant developments for the next 2 years, and overall, it seemed that the investigation had stalled during this time. Another lawsuit arose between Ana and her ex-husband Ahmed regarding the custody of their daughters. By this time, the girls had moved through several foster homes and seemed to have adapted to life without the intervention of their biological parents. Ultimately, the court decided to award custody of the girls to Ahmed on the grounds that their mother, Ana, had not taken responsibility for raising her children. This decision deeply affected Ana and further damaged her reputation. Following this sad news, she suffered a nervous breakdown and was involved in a serious traffic accident that left her hospitalized for several days. Ana's condition continued to deteriorate, and her family was very unhappy with the private investigator she had hired. They were so dissatisfied that they filed a complaint to revoke his license. In addition, Ana's family sued the private investigator because he published a book that allegedly discussed the details of Lorenzo's case. According to the private investigator, one of the people present at Ana's house that day struck Lorenzo in the head around 11 p.m. After the attack, they tried to hide the evidence and make it look like an accident. The private investigator even mentioned individuals who were likely involved in the incident, although proving their involvement was nearly impossible. Notably, this man later published a book. Ultimately, Ana's family won the case, resulting in a substantial cash settlement of $500 from the private investigator. Another version of what happened, according to public opinion, is that Ana had intimate acts with 3 men at the same time in the bedroom. Lorenzo allegedly entered the room without permission and witnessed the incident. As an unwitting witness, the child was able to tell his father what he saw. In a moment of anger, possibly fueled by alcohol or drugs, Ana is said to have struck her son on the head. The blow was likely inflicted with an object rather than her hand, and the object was later discarded. However, it is important to note that this is just a theory and has not been confirmed. In late 2012, the Attorney General revealed at a press conference that there was evidence against Ana and her father. Records show that Ana's father met with then Puerto Rico Governor Luis Fortuño regarding the case. During the meeting, Ana's father allegedly handed the governor a mysterious envelope, the contents of which remain unknown. Soon after, a surprising development occurred. Antonio Segardia, a former attorney general and high-ranking official, unexpectedly assumed the role of representing Ana in legal matters, leading her legal team. In conversations with various news agencies, he stated that Ana had become the target of numerous rumors and speculations from both the media and independent sources. He was convinced that Ana was not only uninvolved in Lorenzo's death, but was also a devoted mother to her children. Ana now seems to have lost interest in regaining custody of her daughters, a right she had previously been determined to reclaim. Notably, Ana's daughters seemed to not want to live with her. They even wrote letters expressing their feelings. In one letter, Ana's eldest daughter criticized her, calling her a bad mother. Curiously, many of these letters have somehow become public. In 2014, the Puerto Rican police, after making little progress, asked the FBI to assist in the investigation. The FBI agreed, and upon their arrival, they conducted a new interview with Luis Gustavo Rivera Sejo, who was now in a psychiatric hospital for individuals who had committed crimes, with a psychologist present. He once again shared his version of events, however. This time, his story differed significantly from his previous statements. He claimed that he was at Ana's family home on the day Lorenzo died, but stated that he did not see or interact with the child. FBI agents expected the man to give a different account of events. As changes in testimony are common among people with certain mental health issues, the next person the federal agents were interested in was Ana. She was scheduled to take a polygraph test, but did not show up, claiming that she had more important matters to attend to, including her birthday. Then a strange incident occurred. Ana's police file, which contained various details, including her toxicology results, was stolen from the police department. Initially, a 20-year-old man was charged with burglary. He confessed to breaking into the police department, but claimed that he did not take any documents. After searching his apartment, the police found no evidence of stolen papers, so he was only charged with petty theft. As time passed, the police, frustrated with the ongoing investigation, once again brought Luis to Ana's family home to reenact the events. This time, he only talked about how he entered the house, completely ignoring the deceased Lorenzo. He said he was hungry and wanted a snack. He eventually expressed a desire to stay there overnight, but then changed his mind. Ana's then-boyfriend, Jesus Genaro Camacho, insisted that he had been with Ana. He admitted that he had gone to her house to drink and have fun, but claimed that he had left early and had not returned. The police continued to grapple with the question of who had attacked Lorenzo. They were particularly concerned about the motive. As many details remained unclear, Ana was never able to provide a consistent timeline of the events that took place that day. Many of Ana's statements contained too many contradictions to be taken seriously. One theory was that Lorenzo had witnessed something that could have implicated his mother, Ana. However, there was no evidence to support these theories, which meant that the police were unable to prosecute any potential suspects in connection with the crime. In 2015, on the 5th anniversary of Lorenzo's death, the 3 men who had been at Ana's house that day were cleared of all suspicion shortly thereafter. The trial of Luis Gustavo Rivera Sejo began to determine his role in Lorenzo's attack. The main piece of evidence against him was a bag he had left at Ana's family home. However, many questions remained as to why neither the police, who had examined the crime scene on the first day, nor anyone else in the house had noticed the bag before. The police later claimed that they had seen the bag but thought it belonged to a family member. The initial examination of the crime scene was not conducted properly. As the police believed it was an accident, Luis's defense attorney made every effort to keep his client out of jail, presenting the results of a recent psychiatric evaluation that showed the man was schizophrenic. Additionally, because he was missing his left forearm, Luis was incapable of performing certain actions on his own. The discussion focused on Luis's mental health, as well as various errors that were made during the initial investigation. One topic discussed was that a mattress on Lorenzo's bed was overlooked. Despite being involved in some of the mysterious circumstances, Ana stated that she found her son lying on the floor in a pool of blood. If this is true, it raises questions about how the blood came to be on the pillowcases, sheets, and mattress. It seems unlikely that the boy would have been able to get back into bed after the fall, especially given the seriousness of his condition at the time. The prosecution presented its own version of the events that evening. They believe that Luis broke into Ana's family home, assuming it was empty. According to them, he went into the kitchen, drank some water, ate some of the available food, and then left the kitchen. They argued that he had brought a knife for self-defense and, after further exploring the house, discovered that there were other people inside. This prompted him to leave the house at that point. He accidentally entered the room where Lorenzo and his sister were. He thought Lorenzo had seen him in order to avoid detection. Luis decided to attack Lorenzo before the boy could call for help. He assaulted the boy and then slammed his head into the floor or wall. This testimony was partially supported by forensic experts, who noted that Lorenzo had been hit multiple times with a blunt object. Luis eventually left the house, but accidentally left behind a bag containing his personal belongings. While this theory seems well organized, it was never proven by evidence and is largely speculative. Additionally, the house was so meticulously cleaned that no fingerprints or DNA from Luis were found at the crime scene. In April 2016, the police decided to drop all investigative efforts related to Luis Gustavo Rivera Sejo. This decision was made because they lacked convincing evidence to link him to the attack on Lorenzo. Additionally, local police have ruled out Ana Cacho Gonzalez as a suspect. To this day, Lorenzo's case remains unsolved. Since 2016, police have not uncovered any new evidence or theories about what happened, and Puerto Rican authorities have made no further progress in their investigation. The public largely believes that Lorenzo's mother, Ana, is solely responsible for the tragedy. Most people who have followed the case feel that Luis was used as a scapegoat to protect Ana. Overall, Lorenzo's case has had a significant impact on the country's history, spurring reforms that have changed the way similar cases are investigated. These reforms aim to improve the investigative process and enhance evidence collection. It is important to note that many people are still demanding justice for Lorenzo and want to identify the person responsible for his death. Unfortunately, it seems that in this situation, the only hope lies in a candid confession from the perpetrator. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Norberto Ronquillo. In 2019, Norberto Ronquillo, a 22-year-old Mexican student, was kidnapped by unidentified men shortly after leaving college. He had just completed his final semester before graduating. Norberto lived with his uncles in southern Mexico City, just a 15-minute walk from Pedregal University, on the evening of July 4. He left the university at 9 p.m. and texted his girlfriend to say he was coming home. A security camera recorded him leaving the building at around 9:30 p.m., but he disappeared afterward. The case attracted widespread attention in Mexico, and finding those responsible should have been easy. However, the mastermind managed to confuse the investigation, creating a bizarre story that captured the attention of many. Norberto was born in Meoqui, Chihuahua. He was known for being very sociable and charming. He was always ready to help those in need and was well liked by many. Norberto's dream was to move to Mexico City to study marketing at Pedregal University after graduation. Upon arriving in the capital, he lived with his uncles, aunts, and cousins. By the age of 22, his life seemed to be in order. He was dating a girl. On July 4, 2019, Norberto left class at around 9:30 p.m. A surveillance camera recorded him leaving the university parking lot while calmly talking on the phone. Just 15 minutes after he left, his uncles and aunts received a call from his phone. But it was not Norberto on the other end of the line. Another voice informed them that their nephew was being held captive. The young uncle panicked and abruptly hung up. The kidnappers called back, but no one answered. Finally, Norberto's aunt picked up the phone and spoke to the criminals. Their message was clear: to see their nephew Norberto alive. His uncle's family needed to hand over 5 million pesos that night at 10 p.m. The police received a report of a gray Toyota Yaris abandoned in the middle of the road. This was the same model that Norberto owned when the police arrived. They failed to secure the area for potential evidence and did not call in forensic experts to conduct a thorough investigation. This mishandling complicated the case, especially since the car was parked near Norberto's uncle's house. with the keys left on the sidewalk. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo returned home, he saw the police nearby and informed them that the car belonged to his family. Unfortunately, the police carelessly returned the car to Osvaldo, who was unaware of the troubling events involving his family. At midnight, Osvaldo returned home and received shocking news. He quickly decided to take his father to the police to report the incident. 40 minutes later, the case was officially opened. Meanwhile, Norberto's aunt chose to handle things differently. At 1 a.m., she asked her husband and son to withdraw the complaint, claiming that she had made a deal with the kidnappers. She also negotiated the ransom down to 500 pesos and some jewelry. However, it was too late. The police had already begun their investigation. Meanwhile, the kidnappers made their demands. At 3:30 a.m., Osvaldo was ordered to pay the ransom for Norberto's safe return. They instructed Osvaldo to go to Las Bombas Street, stop at a car wash, collect the money, and throw it behind bars in an empty lot. Osvaldo carefully followed all the instructions. Then the kidnappers informed him that Norberto would be released at the Chalcocan Canal. Osvaldo waited there for hours, but Norberto never arrived. The kidnappers also stopped communicating, and there was no further contact. At 7 in the morning, Osvaldo decided to call the police, who quickly began searching for the missing person. On June 5, at 10 a.m., the Prosecutor General's office officially opened an investigation. Norberto's relatives were summoned to the Ministry of Defense to provide witness statements. Meanwhile, footage from city cameras was reviewed, but no useful information was found. Cameras that may have captured footage of Norberto's abandoned car were thoroughly examined. Unfortunately, they were pointed in the wrong direction. The only camera facing the right direction was broken. The family's desperation quickly spread throughout the country. On June 6th, Norberto did not return home, and news of his disappearance was widely reported. The university then helped raise awareness, leading to media coverage of the kidnapping. During his graduation ceremony, Norberto's classmates took the opportunity to rally support for the search. Dressed in caps and gowns, they displayed posters with Norberto's picture, which quickly attracted attention on social media. Norberto's mother traveled to the capital and appeared on several television shows. On June 8, a search was conducted in the areas where Norberto's car had been found. Unfortunately, this search did not uncover any new clues. The kidnappers did not contact anyone. As if they had disappeared, questions about Norberto's whereabouts continued to echo throughout the country for a long time. There was only silence, but that silence was finally broken. On June 9 at 6 p.m., the police received an anonymous tip about a body wrapped in a blanket that had been found in the Zumilco area. The police quickly arrived at the reported location. The area was deserted, with no surveillance cameras, suggesting that the perpetrators had planned the crime carefully. The police sent the body for an autopsy. On June 10, Norberto's family came to identify the body. His family confirmed that the body found was Norberto. The autopsy revealed that he had died of exhaustion, and there were signs of torture on his body, including a broken nasal septum. As the investigation continued, the case became increasingly puzzling. Forensic experts reported that the body could have been there for 3 to 5 days, suggesting that Norberto may have died on the day he was kidnapped. Despite attempts to negotiate a ransom with the family, the criminals had no plans to release Norberto. However, these are still just theories, as many uncertainties surrounding the case remain. Norberto's body was cremated, and after the funeral, he was flown back to his hometown. The university suspended all academic activities for 3 days. The investigation into his death continues. Norberto's mother has used social media to call for justice and urge safety measures for all young people to prevent tragedies like her son's from happening again. The first to face consequences was the police, who ignored Norberto's car, a potential piece of evidence. Traces of blood were later found inside the car, but were never tested. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo got into the car to take it to the garage, he accidentally contaminated potential evidence, however. Osvaldo did not know that Norberto was missing at the time, and only learned about it when he got home. Since then, the car has not been mentioned again. The Attorney General's office has analyzed more than 20 hours of video from 6 cameras, including state and private cameras. Located near the scene of the incident, it appears that the criminals used 2 cars to carry out the kidnapping. It was revealed that one of the cars was used to distract attention from the criminals and only intervened if any problems arose. The second car was used specifically for the purpose of kidnapping Norberto. The information gathered led to a 2-part investigation. First, it was assumed that the kidnapping was carried out by a Mexican organized crime group known to the media as the Skinheads. This group targeted students from private universities and high schools within a 10-kilometer radius of Xochimilco. One similarity with Norberto's case is that the gang had previously carried out 5 kidnappings, 3 of which resulted in the victims being killed even after their families had paid ransoms. Furthermore, records show that these victims usually died within the first 48 hours of their capture. However, there are some notable characteristics of skinhead gangs. They shave the victim's head before releasing or killing them. In Norberto's case, his head was not shaved, and there was no evidence that he was being held captive. Negotiations between criminal groups and families are common in these types of crimes. Considering this, the police formed a second hypothesis. The crime could have been committed by someone close to the Norberto. They decided to question Norberto's acquaintances. The Prosecutor General's office found it suspicious that the ransom was arranged so quickly, in just 20 minutes. And it was hard to believe that the criminals would agree to a discount for the family. It was also strange that Norberto's aunt refused to involve the police. Later, the police interviewed Norberto's girlfriend, aunt, uncle, cousins, and close friends. Finally, a breakthrough occurred. The police noticed that Euritzi's ex-boyfriend seemed to be interfering too much in Norberto and Euritzi's private lives. He often expressed dissatisfaction with their relationship, however. Euritzi and Norberto appeared to be a happy couple, regularly sharing photos of themselves together on social media. The day before Norberto went missing, his girlfriend Euritzi posted a tweet that appeared to be directed at her ex-boyfriend, urging him to stop interfering in her life and focus on his own. The Attorney General's office quickly launched an investigation into Euritzi's ex-boyfriend, but the investigation stalled when he could not be found. Finally, a crucial piece of evidence emerged that had previously been overlooked. The red plaid blanket that had been used to wrap Norberto's body had the name Hernandez embroidered on it, indicating that it belonged to a family with that surname. This raised suspicions about Norberto's maternal family. The Attorney General's office investigated 47 people with the surname Hernandez. Unfortunately, these investigations were fruitless and caused delays. Meanwhile, the most promising lead in the case came from surveillance cameras. When the police reviewed footage from a camera on Las Bombas Street, they saw a white van and a red sedan drive by at 3 a.m., shortly after Osvaldo delivered the ransom, with 3 people getting out of the vehicles. After receiving new information, the police were able to clarify some important details. They quickly identified the red sedan and its owner. This discovery led to several arrests. The first arrest was of Daniel, the owner of the red sedan. In his statement, Daniel explained that he used the car to transport passengers for a private company. He said that the person driving the car that night was actually his friend, Oscar. The police then went to Miguel Hidalgo to find Oscar. When Oscar was arrested, the police found packages containing illegal synthetic substances. They also learned that he had previously been involved in a criminal case, based on information provided by Daniel and Oscar. The police arrested Jose Fernando, who was also found to have illegal substances, on July 7, more than a month after Norberto's death. The preliminary results of the investigation were released to the public. Creating considerable interest, the police stated that one of the suspects was Daniel's cousin, but Daniel's father insisted that he had never heard of Norberto. This raised questions about how Daniel could have known Norberto and why he would plan to kill him. New evidence quickly emerged in the case to expedite the investigation. Oscar appeared in court a few days later and surprisingly confessed to being involved in the crime. They uncovered key details and identified a woman named Yuritsi Martinez, Norberto's ex-lover, as the mastermind behind the crime. Yuritsi met Norberto about 3 years ago, and they dated for a short time. Romantic photos and messages to her were found on Norberto's Facebook page, and his aunt confirmed their relationship. However, the motive behind Yuritsi's involvement in the crime remains unclear. Yuritsi asked for Norberto to be kidnapped because he owed her 700 pesos. They planned to demand 5 million pesos from his family after she received the money. The rest would be divided among the kidnappers. Yuritsi claimed that Norberto's uncle and aunt owned shops in the Central Market, which would make it easier for them to collect the ransom. However, things quickly spiraled out of control, and Norberto was killed on the night of his kidnapping. The police promptly opened a case against Norberto's ex-girlfriend, Yuritsi, until July 14. She was still active on social media after the arrest warrant for Yuritsi was issued. She disappeared. She deleted her social media accounts and turned off her cell phone. A few days later, the investigation revealed that there was no debt between Norberto and Yuritsi. It became clear that she only wanted to profit from Norberto's family. On July 28, 2019, Daniel and Oscar were arrested and taken into custody at a pre-trial detention facility. Initially, it seemed that the case was almost solved, with the only remaining task being to find Yuritsi. However, during the investigation, the police discovered that Elvia, the owner of the house where Norberto had been held, was involved in the kidnapping. On September 21, Elvia was arrested for unlawful deprivation of liberty following her arrest. New details of the investigation emerged. It was revealed that Elvia was a witch and that the kidnappers had approached her to perform a ritual to assist in the kidnapping. Elvia had voluntarily joined the criminal group, motivated by the prospect of receiving a portion of the ransom. The final arrest in the case occurred on October 22. When the police apprehended Jose Fernando, they sought him for drug trafficking. 3 days later, after being taken to prison, Jose was informed that he would also face charges for kidnapping Norberto. This indicated that the case was close to being resolved. However, the family could not achieve full justice because the main instigator, Yuritsi Martinez, was still on the run. The Mexico City judiciary found Jose, Daniel, Elvia, and Oscar guilty of kidnapping and murdering Norberto Ronquillo. They were each sentenced to 140 years in prison and ordered to pay more than 1 million pesos in damages. 4 years after the case, Yuritsi is still missing. Hello again, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michael Weiss. Jake Nolan was born in New York, USA, as the youngest child in his family, with an older brother and an older sister. The family lived on Long Island and was relatively wealthy. Jake was known for being kind and respectful to everyone. However, at the age of 5, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. This condition affected him throughout his life, becoming more evident at the age of 15 when he began to experience mood swings. Despite facing many challenges, Jake had some positive moments in high school, including being recognized for winning a competition. However, this was also when he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression at the age of 17. Jake was hospitalized after a disturbing incident involving his parents after an argument. He threatened to commit end life with a kitchen knife during this time. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a serious condition. His parents tried to help him manage his health problems and regularly consulted specialists, but their efforts were not very successful. Jake was prescribed about 30 different medications. This alone led to serious side effects, often leaving him feeling worse than before. Many of the medications interacted negatively with each other, resulting in poor treatment outcomes during this time. Jake also began drinking and using drugs. When Jake started college, his parents hoped he would improve. At first, everything seemed fine, but then they received a worried call from the school. The dean wanted to know why Jake had been absent for the past 2 weeks. That's when his parents discovered that he had been in bed most of the time. His depression worsened, and he began using illegal drugs regularly. This alarmed his family, who wanted to help him. But even at 19, Jake showed no interest in studying or working. Instead, he spent all his time having fun and avoiding responsibility. One day, Jake's mother spoke to her niece, Pamela Buckbinder, a successful psychiatrist in New York by her 40s. Pamela had won numerous awards and occasionally published articles in popular magazines. Concerned about Jake, Pamela offered to take him into her home for a while and set up a makeshift rehab facility there. She promised to organize therapy sessions for Jake and monitor his medication instead of charging him for her help. Pamela asked Jake to assist her in caring for her 4-year-old son during the summer due to their family ties. They agreed to her plan. Pamela and Jake are cousins, and she saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their family bond while helping to care for her son. When Jake's mother shared this with him, he viewed it as a break from his family and agreed to stay with Pamela for a few months, during which he would help care for her son. Pamela's husband is another prominent psychiatrist, Michael Weiss. Pamela and Michael had a rocky relationship. They often argued and got into physical fights. In one incident, Pamela was arrested for throwing a glass at Michael, causing a head injury that required stitches. Pamela argued that they were both equally at fault, as Michael was also arrested after another altercation and was accused of threatening her. Pamela and Michael ended their relationship in 2009, after which Pamela moved to Greenwich Village in Manhattan in 2011. They began a custody battle during this time. Pamela often spoke ill of Michael to their son, portraying him as a bad father. She also spread false and damaging stories about him to others, apparently trying to turn the child and others against him. This behavior was primarily intended to gain an advantage in the custody dispute and secure a substantial child support payment. By 2012, the couple finally reached an agreement that allowed Michael to spend weekends with their children. However, an unusual condition imposed by Pamela was that Michael purchase a life insurance policy on himself, naming their son Calder as the beneficiary, with Pamela as the trustee. Eventually, Michael, exhausted from the legal battle, reluctantly agreed to this questionable request. The custody battle reached its final stages after Jake moved into Pamela's home. Jake began sharing his thoughts and struggles with Pamela, who gave him advice, monitored his medications, and made his life much easier. Jake became the godfather to Pamela's son Calder, and often said that the experience gave his life meaning. On November 12, 2012, Michael spent the day with his son, Calder, for the first time. He felt excited because he had reached an agreement with Pamela about custody, allowing him to interact with Calder without stress. Michael's schedule that morning was to take Calder to kindergarten and then go to work. In the afternoon, Calder would return home to his mother, while Michael was attending a therapy session with a patient. Jake appeared at the door with a worried look on his face and carrying a large bag. Michael realized that Jake knew he had moved in with Pamela and was dealing with some mental health issues. However, Michael was unsure about the current situation because he was with a patient. He asked Jake to wait outside until he finished. When the therapy session ended, Michael found Jake still waiting in the hallway. Dr. Michael asked him about the large bag. Jake claimed that it contained important documents for Calder's kindergarten that he had helped Pamela prepare. However, Michael was skeptical about this explanation. Michael asked Jake to leave the bag outside because he was worried that Jake might plant a listening device there. However, Jake insisted he couldn't leave the bag behind as it could be stolen. Eventually, Michael relented and allowed Jake to bring the bag inside with him upon entering the office. Jake asked to use the restroom first. Later, he attacked Michael with a sledgehammer. Fortunately, Michael avoided a fatal blow to the head, but Jake struck him in the shoulder. Jake then lost his balance because the sledgehammer was too heavy, dropped it, and pulled out a knife to attack Michael. Michael fought back, pushed Jake away, tried to run into the hallway, and called for help. People gathered in the hallway, and shortly after, Michael passed out from blood loss. Witnesses called the police and paramedics. Jake, however, didn't attempt to flee. Instead, he sat in the hallway and took pictures. When the paramedics arrived, they found Michael unconscious and Jake sitting beside him. Jake told the paramedics that Michael had attacked him first. Meanwhile, both Michael and Jake were taken to the hospital, where they were placed under police supervision. Forensic experts retrieved the sledgehammer and knife from Michael's office. Upon examination, they found a DNA sample on the handle of the sledgehammer that matched Jake's. The knife was also analyzed and determined to have come from Pamela's kitchen inside a large bag belonging to Jake. The police found a pack of cigarettes, zip ties, and a hand-drawn map of the building where Michael worked, showing multiple entrances and exits. The police traced the bag to a purchase near Pamela's home. They reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby hardware store and observed that Jake had bought the sledgehammer used in the attack, along with zip ties and a bag. The night before, Pamela was seen next to him, paying cash for the items, possibly aware of the planned crime. Although Michael suffered multiple injuries, none were life-threatening. Jake was taken to the hospital but was released on $200 bail while awaiting a hearing on the attempted murder charge. He is allowed to stay with his parents in Miami. Jake spoke to the police and claimed that the attack was self-defense, stating that Michael had taken Jake's sledgehammer and tried to injure himself. When Jake realized that his lie was not convincing, he decided to tell the police the truth about what had happened. He accused Pamela of being the real mastermind, claiming that she had manipulated him and turned him against Michael. Pamela then provided the police with Jake's medical history, which indicated that he had suffered from a number of serious mental health issues. The police investigated Jake's testimony, and evidence supporting his claim quickly emerged. Pamela had an ulterior motive to harm her ex-husband. In November 2013, Michael Weiss filed a lawsuit against Pamela, alleging that his ex-wife pressured him into taking out a $1 million life insurance policy. He pointed out that the attack occurred just 4 days after the contract was issued, which raised suspicions. Michael believed that this was a planned plot to benefit Pamela financially. Additionally, Jake's attorney secured a restraining order against Pamela, arguing that it was necessary to protect Jake's mental health from her influence. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Pamela, she was not arrested or questioned, and her medical license remained intact. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and an expert was brought in to analyze the building blueprints found in Jake's bag. It was revealed that Pamela had drawn the blueprints, but she claimed that the maps were for Jake to find Michael and pick up Calder if necessary. Pamela was in regular contact with Jake before and after the attempted assassination. Their text messages showed that she was aware of his whereabouts and what was going on. After Jake sent a selfie to Michael following the attempted assassination, they had a long conversation that revealed the plan had failed. Jake expressed guilt for not being able to kill Michael during this time. Jake fully admitted his actions and showed a willingness to accept the consequences, no matter how severe they might be. He told detectives that Pamela had convinced him to kill Michael to free her from an abusive relationship that was harming both her and her young son at the time. Jake was so close to the boy that he wanted to help his relatives get rid of Michael. He did not know that Michael's life was insured for a significant amount of money and that Pamela could benefit from the insurance payout. Jake did not care about the money because his family supported him. However, Pamela manipulated him to the point that he was willing to do anything for her. Unfortunately, the case did not progress. Even after 2 years, the situation remained unchanged. As of 2015, Pamela was still living comfortably at home with her son, sharing custody with Michael, as there was no evidence to prove her involvement in the attempted murder. Meanwhile, Jake is in Miami, receiving comprehensive care, and his condition begins to improve as he starts to regain his sanity. Jake realizes that he has become a pawn in Pamela's scheme. Devoted to caring for her child and managing household responsibilities, he understands that Pamela never intended to help him. Instead, she aimed to use him for her own dubious purposes. Jake has overcome his harmful habits and envisions a future where he can start a family and raise children. However, he faces the serious possibility of being imprisoned for years due to the betrayal of someone he once trusted. Additionally, questions begin to arise regarding the nature of Jake's relationship with Pamela, which seems to extend beyond simple family support and therapeutic assistance. Their interactions resemble typical affectionate exchanges between newlyweds, and a photo of them together in bed has surfaced. It appears that Pamela is pursuing Jake with the intent of deepening their relationship. Possibly to manipulate him, Pamela recounted a fabricated story of having endured physical violence throughout her marriage. She eventually accused Michael of trying to gain custody of their son. Over time, Jake grew to believe her, insisting that he would do anything for Pamela. She convinced him that in order to survive, he needed to eliminate Michael. It was clear that Pamela was not strong enough to confront a robust adult man, making Jake a suitable candidate for her dangerous scheme. The trial began in March 2016, where the jury was presented with a detailed account of the events that took place on November 12, 2012. Jake recalled Pamela waking him up that morning, insisting that it was time to put their plan into action. She showered him with compliments, calling him her savior. After breakfast, she continued her manipulations. On November 11, they purchased a sledgehammer, zip ties, and a bag in preparation for their plan. The details of the plot were far more sinister than the events that transpired in Michael's office. Initially, Jake was supposed to attack Michael and torture him before he died. Pamela wanted Michael to suffer for as long as possible. Jake then went to Michael's office, entering through the service entrance, where security cameras recorded his arrival. Remarkably, he made no attempt to conceal his identity. With confidence, he walked down the hallway and approached Michael's office. At the time, Michael was examining a patient, forcing Jake to step back and wait outside. Jake was in the hallway, rethinking his actions. He soon realized that if he backed out now, he wouldn't be able to face Pamela. There was no turning back. So he carried out the attack. While awaiting trial, Jake undergoes evaluations from several psychiatrists, who noted that he was fully aware of his actions. Concluding that his decision to kill Michael was intentional, the jury deliberated and found Jake Nolan guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 9.5 years in prison, while Pamela remained free on bail. This changed on October 19, 2017, when the police attempted to arrest Pamela and urged her to turn herself in, but she ignored their requests. When the search began, she could not be found at any known address and did not answer her cell phone or work phone. An anonymous source eventually informed the police of Pamela's whereabouts, and she was arrested at a friend's home. Pamela was charged with second-degree intentional homicide and first-degree assault on September 7, 2022. Pamela Buchbinder admitted guilty to these charges to avoid a 25-year sentence, however. On October 11 of that year, she attempted to withdraw her guilty plea, claiming that she had been under the influence of illegal drugs and had been assaulted by security guards. Her request to withdraw her guilty plea was denied. Ultimately, Pamela was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and her medical license was officially revoked. Jake felt deep remorse for his actions. His parents firmly believed in his innocence and were convinced that Pamela was responsible for his condition. Jake's parents stated that sending Jake to Pamela's home for treatment was the worst decision they ever made. Pamela, however, continued to maintain her innocence. The child's father, Michael, was granted custody. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, United States. His father, chemist Lionel Herbert Dahmer, and his mother, Joyce Annette Dahmer, faced various challenges. Joyce struggled with depression and possibly other mental health issues, which required her to take large amounts of medication, even during her pregnancy. Despite these difficulties, their first child, Jeffrey, was born healthy and displayed a cheerful and curious personality in his early years. However, when he was about 5 years old, he developed a double inguinal hernia and required surgery. Initially, Jeffrey was described as an active and cheerful child, but after the surgery, his parents observed a change in his demeanor. He seemed more withdrawn and showed signs of depression. One day, Jeffrey witnessed his father taking an animal carcass from under the house and placing it on a tray. The sight caught Jeffrey's attention, and he became curious. Without hesitation, he began playing with it. His father, Lionel, whose job and academic career required him to move several times, eventually earned a doctorate in chemistry. This achievement led Jeffrey's family to settle in Bath, Ohio, where they found a large plot of land surrounded by trees. After moving to Ohio, Jeffrey began to avoid social interaction, preferring solitude. However, he cherished the time he spent with his father, participating in various activities together, such as fishing. Jeffrey enjoyed watching his father prepare fish and was curious about what was inside them. Lionel noticed this passion in his son and suggested that he learn taxidermy. Although Jeffrey did not experience physical abuse at home, he grew up in a tense atmosphere. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, argued frequently. Lionel often criticized Joyce for not taking good care of their son, while Joyce expressed frustration with Lionel's long hours at work and school, feeling that he was neglecting the family. Over time, they realized that Jeffrey was quite withdrawn and had difficulty connecting with others. When Jeffrey was 7, he got his first pet, a dog. This brought him immense joy, and he took great care of the dog, even bringing it along when he explored the area for animal carcasses. At the same time, Joyce became pregnant with their second child. To help Jeffrey feel included, his parents allowed him to choose a name for his younger brother, which he decided would be David. Jeffrey attended primary school in Bath, where his father made efforts to encourage him to socialize with other children. Although these efforts were largely unsuccessful, on weekends, Lionel spent time with Jeffrey, tending to the garden and bees together, and attending local fairs. Their relationship was strong, and Jeffrey even wrote poems for his father during this time. His mother, Joyce, was hospitalized for depression and anxiety, which was a difficult period for the family. When Jeffrey entered secondary school, he continued to enjoy dissecting animals and began to explore his abuse. During this time, he kissed a boy from the neighborhood, which led him to realize that he was attracted to boys. Although he struggled to accept this part of himself, Jeffrey faced increasing anxiety due to his father Lionel's homophobic views. Throughout high school, he endured bullying. To cope with the challenges around him, he turned to alcohol. This dependence on alcohol led him to come to school drunk and even drink during class. As a result, he was often reprimanded and disciplined. His behavior varied greatly. Sometimes he was the center of attention, while at other times he was very shy in school. Jeffrey often engaged in behavior that was considered humorous or eccentric. He acted as the class clown, frequently imitating epileptic seizures and making sheep noises during class. As he grew older, he even began drawing chalk sketches of human bodies on the classroom floor. Around the age of 14 or 15, Jeffrey began to experience disturbing obsessive thoughts related to sex. This struggle intensified over time, leading him to develop various fantasies. However, unlike typical teenage fantasies, Jeffrey's were more disturbing. Jeffrey found his senior year of high school particularly challenging. Because his parents decided to get a divorce, Lionel moved away and took refuge in a hotel, while Jeffrey's mother also decided to leave home, taking her youngest son, David, with her and leaving Jeffrey alone. Just a few weeks after graduating, he began to explore his fantasies more freely. Jeffrey's fantasies began to take shape in a disturbing way. He often thought about a young man he had met while playing sports on his way home. This man frequently jogged in the evenings, shirtless, and Jeffrey found himself drawn to him. Jeffrey then imagined a scenario where he would hide in the bushes, and when the man passed by, Jeffrey would attack him and take him home. However, on the day, Jeffrey decided to make this fantasy a reality. The young man did not show up for his usual jog. Another fantasy that Jeffrey cherished was picking up a hitchhiker and taking him home. In this scenario, they would share an intimate moment and eventually live together in harmony. This fantasy became a reality in 1978 when Jeffrey was driving down the road and spotted a young hitchhiker who fit his ideal type. Jeffrey stopped and offered the young man a ride in his car. The young man, eager to go to the summer music festival, accepted Jeffrey's invitation to have a beer at his house first. His name was Stephen Hicks, and he had just turned 18. They returned to Jeffrey's house together after drinking a few beers. Stephen asked Jeffrey to fulfill his promise to take him to the festival. Jeffrey hesitated, and an argument ensued. Eventually, Stephen decided to leave, which escalated the situation in a fit of rage. Jeffrey hit Stephen with a dumbbell, causing him to fall to the floor, unconscious. In a panic, Jeffrey strangled Stephen until he stopped breathing. Jeffrey then processed Stephen's body, placing it in 5 black trash bags. He loaded the bags into his car and drove off to find a place to dispose of them. Jeffrey began to drive erratically and out of his lane. The patrolman saw Jeffrey and asked him why he was driving like that. Jeffrey confided in the officer about his struggles with insomnia and his parents' recent divorce. Expressing feelings of hopelessness about his life, he remained polite and calm throughout the conversation. When the officer asked about the car, he explained that it was full of trash and that he was looking for a place to properly dispose of it. Jeffrey made a good impression on the officer, who asked him to return home. Jeffrey complied and returned to his house with the trash bags containing Stephen's body. He eventually hid the bags in the basement. The next day, he continued to process Stephen's body. Attempting to crush the bones, he then scattered them in various locations behind the house. In the days that followed, Jeffrey paid attention to newspapers and news reports, hoping to find any updates on the missing man. However, he found none. He had committed a serious crime, but it was still a secret. This prompted him to repeat his crime. A week after Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, left home, Lionel found his son living alone and increasingly anxious. He encouraged Jeffrey to find a job, but Jeffrey showed little interest instead. He spent his days drinking. To help, Lionel took him to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and arranged sessions with psychologists. Lionel encouraged Jeffrey to pursue his studies at Ohio University. Although Jeffrey did not outright refuse, he continued to drink and think about Stephen's murder in the following months. He donated blood in exchange for money to buy alcohol by the end of the semester. His academic difficulties led to his expulsion from the university, however. Lionel was determined and convinced Jeffrey to enlist. Believing that military discipline could have a positive impact on him, Jeffrey complied and successfully passed the selection process. His passion for medical care took him to San Antonio, Texas, where he trained to become a military medic. Allowing him to gain a deeper understanding of human anatomy, Jeffrey eventually found his passion in his work. After 6 months, he had changed dramatically. Military physical training not only improved his physique, but also made him more sociable. For the first time, Lionel witnessed his son smile, although not while on leave. After completing his training, Jeffrey was deployed to a base in Germany. Unfortunately, his struggles with alcohol were not resolved, and when the authorities learned of the problem, he was discharged from the military upon returning to the United States. Jeffrey chose to distance himself from his father instead of going home. He settled in Miami, where he rented a hotel room and found work at a diner. At first, his life seemed okay, but it quickly became unstable. Jeffrey drank more and soon found himself unable to afford a hotel room, forcing him to sleep on the beach. Realizing that he could not continue like this, he decided to ask his father for financial help. Lionel, understanding that giving his son money might cause him to drink more, Lionel bought Jeffrey a ticket home instead, determined not to give up. Lionel committed to helping his son find a better path forward. Lionel picked Jeffrey up from the airport. Jeffrey greeted him with a bright smile, which initially led Lionel to believe that his son was simply happy to see him. However, it soon became clear that Jeffrey had consumed a significant amount of alcohol before the flight. Faced with this reality, Lionel decided that the best course of action would be to send Jeffrey to live with his grandmother in Milwaukee. During his time with her, Jeffrey matured considerably. He developed a deep respect for his grandmother, who, by many accounts, was the only person he felt truly close to. Jeffrey helped her with various chores around the house and even attended church with her during the first few weeks. Jeffrey began reading the Bible, which helped him alleviate some of his negative thoughts. However, he still struggled with his fantasies. One day, he stole a male mannequin from a clothing store and hid it in his closet. He saw the mannequin as the perfect companion because it never rejected him, made no demands, and inspired him. However, one day, his grandmother discovered the mannequin and was horrified. She insisted that Jeffrey leave the house, but he calmed her down by promising to get rid of it one day. While sitting in the library, a man approached Jeffrey and handed him a note instructing him to meet in the men's room. Although Jeffrey chose not to accept the invitation, the incident sparked something within him, and after 9 years, his repressed desires resurfaced. In 1985, Jeffrey frequented the sauna, looking for men to satisfy his desires. When he found someone who interested him, he would invite them out for a drink. However, he would secretly put sleeping pills in their drinks. When the victim passed out, Jeffrey would lie down next to them. After one of his victims was poisoned and hospitalized, Jeffrey was banned from the club he frequented. Despite this, he continued to seek abuse partners in other bars and clubs. He preferred muscular young men and did not care about their skin color or hair color. In November 1987, Jeffrey met a man named Stephen Twomey, a dancer and waiter from Michigan. They fell in love and decided to spend some time alone together. They rented a room at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Jeffrey offered Stephen a cocktail that had been spiked with sleeping pills. When Jeffrey woke up the next morning, he found bruises on Stephen Twomey's forearms and chest, along with blood coming from his mouth. Jeffrey did not remember killing Stephen and could not believe it had happened. However, he was in the same room as the corpse, which prompted him to quickly leave the hotel, cross the street, and buy a suitcase. He returned to the hotel, placed Stephen's body in the suitcase, paid the bill in the lobby, and called a taxi. A hotel employee helped Jeffrey carry the suitcase, which was so heavy that the employee jokingly asked if there was a body inside. Jeffrey replied, "Yes," and they both laughed. Unaware that the employee was helping to dispose of a body, Jeffrey then went to his grandmother's house with the suitcase and secretly took it to the basement. He began to process Stephen Tuomi's body. He placed it in trash bags and then moved the bags containing the body into the trash. Several months later, Stephen Tuomi's relatives filed a missing persons report after he was last seen the night he met Jeffrey while working as a waiter, although police initially believed that Stephen had simply left. His family did not accept this explanation. They had been unable to contact him, and his belongings were still in his house. However, the investigation stalled, and there was no explanation for Stephen Tuomi's disappearance. After not being held accountable for his actions, Jeffrey increasingly embraced his dark desires and became a serial killer over the next 5 years. He committed multiple murders on his free nights and weekends. After 3 months of searching for new victims, Jeffrey met a 14-year-old boy at a bus stop near a club. Jeffrey approached the boy and offered to pay him $50 to sleep with him, and unfortunately, the boy accepted the offer. They took the bus to Jeffrey's grandmother's house, where she was sleeping, while they went down to the basement. There, Jeffrey drugged the boy and then strangled him. He became more perverted, abusing the boy while he was dead as the body began to decompose. Jeffrey treated it like those of his previous victims. He began to dispose of the body of James Dox Tater. He packed the body in plastic bags and threw it in the trash. The victim's name was James Dox Tater, according to the Tampa Bay Times. James had run away from home 2 days earlier to escape his abusive stepfather, although his mother filed a complaint. Police showed little interest in finding him. Jeffrey's fourth victim was Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old Hispanic man. They met outside a gay bar called Phoenix. Jeffrey lured Richard to his grandmother's house, promising to pay him to spend the night in the basement. Jeffrey drugged Richard with sleeping pills, then strangled him with a leather strap and began abusing him after he was dead. After satisfying his desires, Jeffrey put the body parts in garbage bags, which were picked up by a garbage service the next day. Richard's family urged the police to investigate his disappearance, but the officers believed he had left home voluntarily. However, Richard's sister believed otherwise and convinced her relatives to hire a private investigator. Richard's father, who worked at a golf course, spent all his savings on the investigator. But it turned out that the investigator was a fraud. Meanwhile, Richard's mother prayed daily for his safe return. Jeffrey's grandmother asked him to move out because she was fed up with him. He was no longer the grandson she used to go to church with. His drinking, his habit of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the stench from the basement and garage were too much for her to bear. As a result, Jeffrey had to find a new place to live. He rented a small apartment, where he stayed for a while as he prepared for his next victim. Jeffrey then found his fifth potential victim, a 13-year-old boy who came to his apartment. They met on the street, where Jeffrey offered to pay the boy in exchange for allowing him to take pictures. However, when Jeffrey tried to touch the boy got scared and ran away. The 13-year-old then informed his parents about the incident, and they reported it to the police. As a result, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with harassment. He received a 1-year sentence at the Milwaukee Correctional Center. Although he was allowed to leave during the day to go to work, he was required to return to the facility at night just days before his sentence began. Jeffrey met his sixth victim, a 24-year-old man named Anthony Sears. On March 25, 1989, Jeffrey and Anthony met at a bar, and when the bar closed, they decided to spend the night together. They could not go to Anthony's house because his girlfriend was there. Jeffrey asked a friend to drive them to his grandmother's house when they arrived. He took Anthony to the basement and committed his usual act. However, this time was different. After disposing of the body, he put it in several different garbage bags. Some of Anthony's remains he threw in the trash, while others he kept in his locker at work during Jeffrey's trial. His lawyer successfully reduced his sentence to just 10 months in a rehabilitation center. Jeffrey's father wrote to the judge, asking that Jeffrey be allowed to attend an alcohol treatment program while incarcerated. However, the judge received the letter too late, and Jeffrey was released without undergoing any rehabilitation. After his release, Jeffrey upgraded the security in his apartment by installing cameras and an alarm system. On June 24, 1990, Jeffrey went on a killing spree while at one of his favorite bars. He noticed a man named Raymond Smith. Jeffrey drugged Raymond and abused him before killing him. Just a month after killing Raymond, Jeffrey targeted another victim, 27-year-old Edward Smith. Edward was lured in with an offer of $100 to have his picture taken. With Jeffrey pretending to be a photographer, Edward was last seen alive talking to Jeffrey at a club. In September 1990, Jeffrey murdered his 8th victim, 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Ernest was attractive and healthy, and he worked as a dancer. He agreed to pose for photos in Jeffrey's apartment for $50, which put him in a dangerous situation. Jeffrey followed his usual pattern, plied Ernest with a mixture of alcohol and strong drugs. And this time, however, Ernest woke up before Jeffrey could strangle him. Resulting in a struggle, Jeffrey attacked Ernest with a knife. After killing him, Jeffrey disposed of the body as he had done with his other victims. But this time, he took a more disturbing step. Not only did he handling of the body, he also put it in the freezer for later use. The foul smell emanating from Jeffrey's apartment caused complaints from neighbors. To explain the smell, Jeffrey claimed that his meat refrigerator had broken down. To solve the problem, he bought a large plastic barrel and filled it with acid to destroy the body parts. Although he was able to remove some of the evidence, the smell remained. It seemed that Jeffrey did not care about the complaints from the neighbors. On September 24, 1990, Jeffrey continued his killing spree, targeting David Thomas, a 22-year-old man whom he had met at the Grand Avenue Mall. Jeffrey convinced David to return to his apartment for a few drinks, offering additional money if he posed for a photo. After giving David a drink laced with sedatives, Jeffrey found himself not attracted to him, but was afraid David would be angry when he found out he was drugged. As a result, Jeffrey strangled him. He took photos of handling of the body disposal and kept those photos for unknown reasons. Jeffrey stopped killing for 4 months. He met his next victim in February 1991. This victim, his 10th, was 17-year-old Curtis Straughter. Curtis had just lost his job as a nurse and was looking forward to becoming a model and attending college. They met at a bus stop, tragically. This was not the end of Jeffrey's list of victims. Just 2 months later, he met Errol Lindsay, a 19-year-old boy who was also lured by the promise of money to take pictures. The next victim was 31-year-old Tony Hughes. Tony, who had lost his hearing as a child due to medication, was cheerful and sociable. He loved to dance and made friends easily. Tony was last seen on May 24, 1991, at a club. That night, Jeffrey invited him to his house, where he continued his killing spree. Unfortunately, Tony's body was left in Jeffrey's apartment for several days before being dumped in a dumpster on May 26, 1991. A tragic chapter unfolded when Jeffrey met Conorak Synthesophone, a 14-year-old Laotian teenager. Conorak was the younger brother of a previous victim who had escaped from Jeffrey. The situation was heartbreaking. Conorak had accepted money from Jeffrey to help his family, who was struggling financially and faced challenges due to their limited English skills. Conorak had been drugged by Jeffrey. After ensuring that Conorak was unconscious, Jeffrey left to buy alcohol, planning to strangle him upon his return. However, Conorak regained consciousness and escaped from the apartment. He wandered the streets until he encountered 2 girls, who were the nieces of Jeffrey Dahmer's next-door neighbor. The girls saw Conorak, who was injured, and they called 911 for help. The police, along with paramedics, rushed to the scene. When they arrived, They found Konarak lying in the middle of the road. They picked him up and placed him in a nearby building. When they began asking him questions, Jeffrey turned around, claiming that Konarak was his boyfriend, with whom he had just had a fight, and that he had been drinking heavily. The police accepted Jeffrey's explanation. The two girls begged the police to check Jeffrey's identification, but they refused. They urged the officers to listen to them. Pointing out the bruises and cuts on Konarak's body, the girls insisted that they knew the boy and that he was definitely a minor. The officers rudely told the girls to be quiet and even threatened to arrest them for trying to help Konarak. Had the officers checked Jeffrey's identification, they would have discovered that he was on mandatory parole for a previous conviction for molesting Konarak's brother. Instead, both officers assisted Jeffrey in taking Konarak back to his apartment, and one officer even placed him on the sofa. Once inside the apartment, the officers detected a foul odor, which Jeffrey explained was from a broken refrigerator filled with rotting meat that he had not disposed of. Surprisingly, the officers did not find anything suspicious. Jeffrey even showed them pictures of Konarak that he had taken earlier. Another alarming detail that the police overlooked was the body of Tony Hughes in the bedroom. The police left the scene, but the two girls called them back to check if they needed to identify themselves as witnesses. Unfortunately, the police dismissed their concerns, claiming it was just a disagreement between two adult partners. When Jeffrey was left alone with Konarak, he decided to inject hydrochloric acid into the boy's head. He did this to create a zombie. He had always dreamed of having a companion who would obey his every command without question. These experiments ultimately led to Konarak's death. Jeffrey then handling of the body. Konarak's, the next victim added to Jeffrey's list, was 20-year-old Matt Turner, whom he met at a bus stop. Matt accepted Jeffrey's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a professional photo shoot at his apartment. Jeffrey drugged, strangled, and handling of the body Matt's. On July 5, 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger became Jeffrey's victim. They met at a bar in Chicago, and Jeremiah went to Jeffrey's apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him. Jeffrey then drugged Jeremiah and injected boiling water into his skull twice, causing him to fall into a coma and die 2 days later. Oliver Lacey, a 23-year-old athlete, accepted an offer for a photo shoot for money and accompanied Jeffrey to his apartment. There, Lacey and Jeffrey engage in intimate activities. Just 4 days later, on July 19, Jeffrey lured 25-year-old Joseph Bradehoff to his apartment. Joseph was strangled and laid out on Jeffrey's bed, covered with a sheet. For 2 days, on July 21, Jeffrey began handling of the body Joseph's. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey approached a group of 3 friends at a bar while they were drinking. He introduced himself as a photographer and paid $100 to anyone to pose for photos. Only one, a 32-year-old homeless man named Tracy Edwards, agreed. Jeffrey invited Tracy to his apartment and mixed him a cocktail, which he offered to all of his victims. However, Tracy, being as smart as he was, noticed a strange taste in the drink and decided not to finish it. Jeffrey then attempted to be intimate with Tracy, but Tracy repeatedly refused. Eventually, Jeffrey handcuffed one of Tracy's hands, leading to a struggle. During the fight, Jeffrey grabbed a knife, but Tracy fought back, hit Jeffrey, and escaped from the apartment. On the street, Tracy spotted a police car and informed the officers about the incident. They accompanied him to Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey tried to prevent the police from searching his place, but it was extremely dirty, and a strong stench filled the air. While going through boxes in Jeffrey's apartment, the police discovered gruesome photos of his victims. It was clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. This was the beginning of the end for Jeffrey Dahmer. The police searched the apartment and arrested Jeffrey. Inside the refrigerator, they discovered numerous human body parts. In a container filled with acid, they found more human body parts. They also found photographs that not only revealed the bodies of the victims, but also documented the many abuses Jeffrey had committed against them. Jeffrey felt relieved that he no longer had to hide such a secret that he had kept for so many years. When he realized that he would have to face the consequences of his actions, he chose to confess everything. His confession took 6 weeks to complete and spanned 159 pages, detailing every aspect of his crimes, from his first murder to his last victim. Jeffrey explained that at first, he just wanted to lie next to the men he had kidnapped. But over time, his desires became increasingly horrific. He admitted that the only way to keep his victims with him forever was to kill them. Jeffrey Dahmer claimed that he did not want to kill. Instead, he wanted a zombie-like companion that he could control indefinitely. Psychologists who worked with Jeffrey concluded that his motive was not abuse, but a desire for control. After Jeffrey's detailed confession, the court no longer had to prove his guilt. It only needed to determine his sanity. At the time, Wisconsin did not have the death penalty if he were found insane. He would have been committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. Although there was a possibility that he could be released in the future, the trial began on January 30, 1992, due to the serious nature of the case. Many security measures were taken in the courtroom, including the installation of bulletproof glass throughout the 2-week trial. Jeffrey sat silently, listening to arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. Jeffrey's defense strategy was simple. They did not try to argue that he was not guilty of murder. Instead, the defense sought to have him hospitalized for treatment. They argued that he needed psychological and psychiatric help, asserting that normal people do not commit such heinous acts. The prosecution, in contrast, argued that, under Wisconsin law, a person who remembers his actions and understands what they have done should be considered sane. A few days later, a verdict was reached. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional life sentence for a 1978 murder, bringing the total to 16 life sentences. Jeffrey expressed deep remorse for the pain he had caused the families of his victims and acknowledged their anger toward him. He was then sent to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Jeffrey rediscovered his faith in God. Recalling the times he had gone to church with his grandmother, he asked a local priest to baptize him, and the priest agreed. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo DeRuthi, attacked Jeffrey, who was hospitalized but survived then. In November of that year, another inmate, Christopher Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence, attacked him. Christopher had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Christopher disliked Jeffrey, who described himself as religious, a characterization that Christopher found insincere. In November, Christopher, Jeffrey, and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, who was serving time for murdering his wife, cleaned the inmate gym. They were also required to clean the locker room and restrooms used after gym class when they were left unsupervised. Christopher seized the opportunity to carry out his dangerous plan to attack both Jeffrey and Jesse. First, he followed Jeffrey into the locker room, where Jeffrey was cleaning. He took a steel bar from the weight room and struck Jeffrey in the head several times. He then attacked Jesse in the same manner. Afterward, he left the gym and called security. Both Jeffrey and Jesse were taken to the hospital, but Jeffrey died en route. His death was confirmed upon arrival at the hospital. Jesse remained in a coma for 2 days before being taken off life support. In accordance with Jeffrey's wishes, his body was cremated, and his ashes were divided among his parents. When details of Jeffrey's crimes became public, protests erupted, focused on the fact that 2 police officers who handed over a boy named Konarak Synthesomphone to Jeffrey were not prosecuted. The 2 police officers did not check the identity of the boy or Jeffrey and did not search Jeffrey's apartment. After the trial, the 2 police officers involved were suspended from duty. They later appealed the dismissal, and the judge ruled in their favor, and awarding each $55 in compensation after being reinstated. Both officers resumed their careers. Additionally, after the investigation was completed, the building where Jeffrey Dahmer lived was demolished in the hope of helping people forget the horrific events that occurred there. Hello again. True crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Richard McCroskey. In September 2009, 4 people were attacked in their home. The bodies were there for days before the police arrived. The victims were Emma Niederbrock, 16, her friend Melanie Wells, 18, and Emma's parents, Mark Niederbrock, 50, and Deborah Kelly, 53. In today's video, we explore the complex chain of events that led to the deaths of these 4 individuals. Mark's family lived in Farmville, Virginia. He graduated from State College and worked as a graphic designer. Mark found his faith and chose to become a pastor, serving at the Hicksburg Church and earning respect in the community. His wife, Deborah, earned her doctorate and became an associate professor of sociology and criminology at Longwood University in Farmville on October 15, 1992. Mark and Deborah welcomed their daughter, Emma Niederbrock. Although she was initially a well-adjusted child, she eventually faced common emotional challenges during adolescence, when Emma was around 15. Her parents decided to homeschool her, which led to intense feelings of isolation and frustration. This struggle pushed her into a long-lasting rebellious phase in early 2009, when her parents divorced. Emma's life became even more chaotic. Although they maintained a good relationship, the divorce took a toll on her. During this time, she discovered horrorcore music, which resonated with her through its lyrics for many fans. These lyrics expressed repressed anger and frustration, feeling isolated in her small town of Farmville. Emma found solace in online horror forums, where she met Melanie, an older girl from Virginia, who understood her struggles. Both girls had fathers who were Presbyterian ministers and bonded over their shared frustration with living in such a restrictive environment. Emma met a horror artist on the forums named Richard Samuel McCroskey. Born December 26, 1988, he lived with his sister and parents in Castro Valley, California. Those who knew Richard described him as quiet and somewhat submissive. He was bullied at school for his weight and red hair, which made him feel like an outsider. Richard enjoyed this isolation and developed unique interests that set him apart from his peers. Notably, he had a strong dislike for music as a child. However, while at the dentist, his father played a CD by Insane Clown Posse, and Richard was instantly drawn to the band. He then borrowed his father's CD to make a copy, which sparked his passion for music. Richard became interested in horror music around the time he was struggling in school. He faced bullying and had trouble fitting into the traditional education system, which caused him to drop out of 2 high schools. It is important to note that Richard was very intelligent. He had a talent for graphic design and even dreamed of starting his own company. However, his passion for horror music eventually took a different direction. Soon after, Richard bought a cheap microphone and began recording his own music under the name Seco Sam. His lyrics described violent fantasies and the desire to harm others. He uploaded some of his songs to his MySpace page and became heavily involved in the horror music community. Other horror music artists accepted him, and despite the dark nature of his work, he still showed real talent in songwriting. After starting his YouTube channel in 2006, Richard uploaded a variety of content, including concert recordings and disturbing videos. In 2008, when he was 19, he began a relationship with 15-year-old Emma. They quickly bonded and began talking on the phone every day. Richard believed that Emma loved him and genuinely wanted to be with him. Despite the distance between them, They exchanged videos to learn more about each other, while his relationship with Emma blossomed. Richard faced some serious problems at home. His father kicked his mother out of the house in April 2009, which may have strengthened his relationship with Emma, whose parents had also split up just a few months earlier. Emma, Richard, and Melanie made plans to meet in September for a horror music festival called Strictly for the Wicked. Richard began going to Farmville. While Melanie flew in and stayed with Emma and Deborah was initially nervous about letting an older guy stay with her daughter, however. Seeing Emma happy for the first time since her divorce, she changed her mind. She agreed to let Richard stay, but insisted that she and Mark accompany the trio to the horrorcore music festival. Emma posted on Richard's MySpace, expressing her love for him and her excitement at finally meeting him. Unfortunately, things did not go as Emma had expected. Richard acted immaturely, which disappointed Emma, however. Since they had planned to attend the festival, she decided to be polite and go along. It was also a chance to see her favorite horrorcore bands. Even though Richard had disappointed her, she knew that she could still enjoy the festival with Melanie. Richard was probably excited to spend time with Emma, whom he considered his girlfriend, however. Emma had other intentions. Those close to her noted that she never referred to Richard as her boyfriend. They were just getting to know each other. Richard may have misinterpreted their relationship. Witnesses reported that Richard was upset when he saw Emma flirting with other guys. She deliberately avoided him, which may have further upset Richard. Tensions rose when Emma exchanged phone numbers with another guy. Richard then invaded her privacy by checking her messages and discovered that the guy had asked Emma to be his girlfriend. Although Richard was emotionally disturbed, no one around him noticed anything unusual. The group then returned to Farmville at approximately 2:43 a.m. Melanie posted on MySpace about the fun she had at the show, how much she missed her family, and that she would be returning home on the 16th. While she was posting, Richard was drinking, using illegal substances, and taking strong painkillers. At approximately 3 a.m. on September 14, Richard took a hammer from Emma's backyard and went upstairs. He entered Melanie's room and struck her on the head, killing her instantly. He then entered Emma's mother, Deborah's room, and killed her as well. After that, he entered Emma's room. While it is unclear what happened next, it is possible that Richard watched her sleep and imagined the life he thought they could have together. He eventually attacked Emma, delivering fatal blows to her face. After the murders, Richard was at a loss for what to do next in his chaotic mental state. He chose to record videos of himself. In these recordings, he talked about the terrible acts he had committed, acknowledging that people would despise him for it. But he felt he had no choice because he had lost control. In the videos, he expressed remorse for his actions and conveyed love for his family. On a darker note, Richard spent 3 days in the house with the people he had hurt. He did not shower, and it was unclear if he even ate or slept by September 16th. However, he could no longer hide from reality. Melanie's mother had been trying to contact her for days, knowing that Melanie would return on the 16th. She became worried when there was still no news and asked her husband to go to Farmville to check on her. He waited 8 hours outside Deborah's house. He kept knocking and calling, but no one answered. So he went home. The next day, Melanie's mother called Deborah's house phone. Richard answered and informed Melanie's mother that the girls were visiting Emma's father, which prompted her to contact Mark. Mark said that Emma and Melanie were not with him and that he had not heard from them for several days. Realizing that something was wrong, Mark went to his ex-wife Deborah's house, where Richard was staying, Around 5 p.m., when Mark entered the house, Richard immediately attacked him after killing Mark. Richard dragged his and Melanie's bodies into Emma's room. Melanie's mother became increasingly concerned. When Mark stopped answering her phone calls, she called Richard again. And this time, he insisted that he did not know where the girls were. He mentioned hearing strange noises coming from the basement. Melanie's mother instructed him to call 911, which he did. When Richard called 911, he stated that he had heard a noise in the basement and was too scared to investigate. He asked the police to come and help him check what the noise in the basement was. He also informed them that the house was not his. He was at his girlfriend's house when the police arrived to assist him. They noticed a foul odor, however. The police did not find any reason to investigate further. They felt satisfied with the explanation Richard provided and left the crime scene. Strangely, the police did not notice the dried blood on Richard. When the police left, he escaped. He found Mark's car keys and drove away. Meanwhile, Melanie's mother repeatedly called the police, urging them to take action regarding her missing daughter, forcing the police to return to the crime scene once more. By this time, Richard was gone. The front door was unlocked, and when the police entered, they smelled a foul odor. They searched the house and discovered 4 bodies, prompting them to launch an investigation into the events that had occurred while trying to get to the airport. Richard, an inexperienced driver, caused a car accident. He was arrested by the police that night, however, because he had not yet been identified as a murder suspect. He was only charged with driving without a license, a misdemeanor. This allowed him to leave as long as he promised to attend court. A tow truck driver came to tow the car and asked Richard if he wanted a ride, which he accepted, requesting to be dropped off at a nearby gas station. During the trip, the tow truck driver noticed a strong, foul odor coming from Richard, describing it as the worst odor he had ever encountered. Upon arriving at the gas station, Richard was captured on surveillance footage, purchasing several items. He then went to the airport to purchase a ticket home. Unfortunately for him, he did not have enough money for his next flight, so he had to wait until the next morning with nowhere else to go. He fell asleep in the waiting area. Eventually, the police identified Richard as a suspect and issued an arrest warrant for him by any means necessary. Airport security captured video footage of him, and a security guard alerted the police to his location, resulting in Richard's arrest. The police initially tried to link him to 2 other murders in the area and charged him with 6 counts of premeditated murder. 2 of those charges were later dropped. But Richard Samuel McCroskey still faced the death penalty on the remaining 4. He eventually pleaded guilty in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence from the judge and was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Richard is currently incarcerated at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. There are reports that other inmates dislike Richard and often bully him. Although these claims have not been verified, Melanie's parents may find comfort in knowing that he is no longer capable of harming anyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Michelle Linehan. In 1994, Michelle Linehan, then known as Michelle Hughes, left Louisiana and moved to New York to work for a modeling agency. However, her stay in New York did not last long, and Michelle quickly changed her career path. When she moved to Alaska, she began working as a stripper at the Great Alaskan Bush Company, which not only brought in a substantial income, but also helped her attract the attention of many men who wanted to marry her here. Michelle continued this work for several months until she met Kent Lepink, Kent appeared modest and reserved, but Michelle's parents described him as impulsive and prone to losing control. Like Michelle, Kent was also trying to start over. After being caught stealing money from his family's business in Michigan, he fled to Alaska. Seeing it as the perfect place to leave his troubles behind, Kent believed meeting Michelle was fate. The two began dating immediately, and within a month, Kent proposed. However, Michelle wasn't in a hurry to give him an answer. When Kent introduced Michelle to his parents, they immediately noticed that she seemed distant toward him. When he hugged her, she instinctively pulled away, making it clear that Michelle didn't truly love Kent. His mother began to suspect that Michelle had been seeing other men, and what Kent's mother felt was right. When traveling salesman Scott Hilka met Michelle at the club in late 1994, he too fell in love with her. They quickly developed a deep relationship. Then, in the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin entered the picture. John, a single father who had recently lost his wife to cancer, although soon discovered Michelle's other relationships. He had already fallen in love with her and also proposed. Remarkably, both Kent and John, the two men, were aware of each other for several months. John, Kent, and Michelle even lived in the same house in Anchorage. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a complex web of relationships. People at the strip club where Michelle worked believed she was simply skilled at manipulating others. She took full advantage of her relationships, receiving money, lavish gifts, and financial support from her admirers. Other dancers didn't find the gifts unusual, as club patrons often gave such presents to gain the women's attention. However, no one truly believed Michelle intended to marry any of these men. All of them were at least 10 years older than her, but she had a way of charming each one. She skillfully played her game, knowing exactly how to manipulate and control the men in her life. Michelle insisted that she never asked for more than what they were willing and able to give. Meanwhile, Kent remained hopeful and genuinely believed he was preparing for a wedding with Michelle. In preparation for this momentous occasion, Kent's father planned to travel to Anchorage in the spring of 1996 to meet his future daughter-in-law. However, shortly before his arrival, she suddenly disappeared. When Kent's father reached Anchorage, he found his son in a state of grief. After a brief visit, he returned to Michigan without fulfilling his purpose. On May 2, 1996, Kent's body was discovered along a deserted road. 80 miles south of Anchorage, he had been attacked 3 times, in the back, chest, and head. His body was found by accident when electricians working nearby noticed his bright red jacket. That same day, a letter arrived at his parents' home. The letter contained instructions that it should only be opened in the event of his death. When his parents received the letter, they immediately tried to contact him, but were unable to reach him. The exact time of Kent's death could not be determined, but forensic experts estimated that he had died 1 or 2 days before his body was discovered. Shell casings were found near the body, but the murder weapon was missing. When the Leppink family learned of the tragedy, Kent's mother immediately remembered the letter her son had left behind, still sealed as he had instructed. At the same time, investigators at the crime scene were unaware that critical evidence was not there, but was instead in the possession of Kent's parents. The letter said that if he died under suspicious circumstances, John, Michelle, or Scott Hilka could be held responsible. He also requested one more thing, which was to ensure that Michelle would spend a long time in prison. Kent clearly suspected Michelle and one of her lovers of plotting to kill him. His parents immediately contacted the police and handed over the letter he had written. When detectives opened the envelope, they quickly realized that this case would be anything but straightforward. The letter provided critical clues and leads, prompting them to thoroughly investigate everyone involved in the love triangle. Scott said he was surprised to learn he was being investigated. As he was not in Alaska at the time of the murder, investigators reviewed all airline and phone records and determined that Scott was not in Alaska, so he was cleared of any involvement in Kent's death. the following day. Detectives questioned a woman, Kent's close friend. At the police station, she broke down in tears upon learning that Kent had been violently killed. During her questioning, she revealed that Kent owned a weapon and mentioned a significant detail. Kent had a $1 million life insurance policy, with Michelle listed as the beneficiary. This could be Michelle's motive for harming Kent. However, investigators discovered that just days before his death, Kent had removed Michelle as the beneficiary. Meanwhile, Michelle was unaware and still had a motive for the murder. A few days after Kent's body was found, police searched his car and discovered another envelope in the glove compartment. This letter seemed to be a correspondence between Michelle and John Carlin. In it, they discussed how John had supposedly bought a cabin at Lake Tahoe and invited Michelle to spend the weekend there. However, detectives uncovered that John hadn't actually purchased any property. It was a lie. The whole situation seemed staged. As if John and Michelle were exchanging messages designed for Kent to find, the letter appeared intended to provoke Kent's jealousy and prompt him to travel to the lake, near where Kent's body was found. But why would they do this? Was it a trap to lure Kent? According to the police, the plan seemed to have worked. Kent had apparently become jealous, and it all ended with 3 weapon wounds. The problem was that this was all based on speculation, no concrete evidence, no witnesses, and not even the murder weapon. A few months into the investigation, the lead investigators were reassigned to another precinct, causing the case to lose momentum and eventually come to a complete halt despite several pieces of circumstantial evidence. No charges were ever filed. At the time, Hilka was living in California. Carlin and Michelle each left shortly after the murders. Michelle settled in Olympia, Washington, seemingly starting a new life and leaving her past behind. After moving to Olympia, Michelle began attending college, pursuing studies in biology and psychology. She later earned a master's degree in public administration. In 1998, she married a young doctor named Colin Linehan in New Orleans, and they welcomed a daughter a year later. In 2004, a new cold case unit was formed in Alaska to reopen unsolved cases. The 8-year-old crime quickly became a priority. As evidence strongly pointed toward Michelle and John, Michelle became the main suspect in planning the murder, while John was believed to be the one who pulled the trigger. For 8 years, the case remained inactive until new detectives showed up at Michelle's suburban home. They asked her to clarify some statements she had made following the murder. By then, Michelle was no longer working as a stripper. She admitted that she had only viewed the job as a temporary way to make money and had left it behind as soon as she could. Colin, a successful physician, was just as shocked as Michelle when the police arrived at their door. By that time, they had been together for 6 years and were living a stable, fulfilling life that seemed to embody the American dream. However, this perfect image was now in jeopardy in Olympia. Michelle's friends were stunned to learn that behind her image as a perfect mother, churchgoer, parent-teacher committee member, businesswoman, and devoted wife, there was a tumultuous past. Authorities began preparing to seize several personal computers used by Michelle, although much of the data on the computers had been deleted. Investigators managed to recover a significant portion. Among the restored files were emails and correspondence between Michelle, Kent, John, and Scott Hilka. It became clear that Michelle had captivated the hearts of all 3 men, telling each one he was the most important person in her life while dismissing the others as mere toys to cover her expenses. These revelations exposed the manipulative dynamics of their relationships, but did not provide enough solid evidence to charge her with murder. There were, however, incriminating findings in the case. Investigators focused on a letter sent the day before the murder, which discussed Seychelles, a country offering citizenship for a substantial fee. The key detail in the letter was Michelle's question about whether Seychelles had an extradition agreement with the U.S. and if it would extradite criminals. However, This alone was not enough to press charges, adding to the complexity. The murder weapon was identified as a .44 caliber Desert Eagle, a distinctive weapon initially. John denied ever owning such a weapon, however. A surprising witness came forward, John's son, who was a child at the time of the crime but had grown into an adult by 2005. He decided to assist in the investigation of this decades-old case, which he had partially witnessed. The son revealed that shortly before the murder, his father had purchased a weapon after seeing a newspaper ad. He claimed to have seen the weapon the day after Kent was killed. It was in the bathroom sink, being cleaned with some kind of chemical, and his father appeared to be handling it carefully. The son could not identify the weapon's model or describe its appearance in this tangled love triangle orchestrated by the dancer. It seemed possible that John had been the one to acquire the weapon from the beginning of the investigation. Michele insisted that she was cooperating with law enforcement and denied any involvement in Kent's death. By the fall of 2006, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to charge both Michele and John Carlin with first-degree murder. Michele was able to post bail immediately and return to her family in Washington while awaiting trial. Although she was required to wear an ankle monitor and adhere to strict restrictions, John, however, was denied bail and spent 6 months in custody before the trial, maintaining his innocence throughout. In court, the prosecutors portrayed Michele as a cunning manipulator who sought to profit from the romantic entanglements she had created. Michele's attorneys argued that the case against her was based entirely on circumstantial evidence, giving them hope for a favorable verdict. John's legal team, on the other hand, shifted suspicion to others, even accusing John's own son, who had testified against him. They claimed Michele was the true mastermind behind the murder, a manipulative seductress who orchestrated the crime, possibly by court, convincing someone else to carry it out. The defense proposed several theories, including the claim that Michele herself had killed Kent, one of her lovers. To collect a $1 million insurance payout, the prosecution argued that John had spent a large amount of money on Michele, whom he deeply loved. When one of her other lovers pulled away, they claimed the only obstacle between John and his happiness with Michele was Kent. Prosecutors alleged that John and Michele had crafted a plan involving a fake letter to lure Kent to the location where he was murdered. Asserting that this letter had set the crime into motion, John contended that the letter was merely a joke created by Michele to make Kent jealous and end their relationship. The prosecution went on to present Michele's exchanges with her lovers, including one between her and John, who stated that he would do anything for her, even risk his life. To the prosecution, this suggested that her lovers might have been willing to commit murder for her. They also highlighted emails referencing the Seychelles and escaping justice, which they argued reinforced their case. The defense countered that, aside from circumstantial evidence, most of the emails were vague and open to multiple interpretations. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found John Carlin guilty of first-degree murder. John was sentenced to 99 years in prison when Michele's trial began. She claimed that she never considered Kent her fiancé, as she had repeatedly turned down his marriage proposals and had agreed only to marry Scott. However, Scott and Michele's relationship fell apart before the crime occurred. The defense argued that Kent had significant personal issues. Claiming he had become a nuisance to Michele, they alleged that he stalked her, monitored her every move, gathered information about her bank accounts and phone records, knew her social security number, and even read her emails. Over time, Michele reportedly realized he was stalking her and began to fear him. She supported these claims, which angered Kent's parents, who accused her of distorting the story. Michele's defenders also described Kent as an unusual individual who had been struggling with mental health problems. They attributed the disturbing letters he sent home to his mental state at the time. The defense attempted to clarify Kent's misconceptions regarding his relationship with Michele. He was fully preparing for a wedding despite her refusal. In the end, it was supposedly too difficult for him to acknowledge that he had been so mistaken, and thus, revenge seemed like a viable option to him. However, the defense argued that this did not make Michele a bad person, let alone a murderer. They also raised concerns about the email exchanges, contending that it was inappropriate to edit or delete portions of the messages to leave only incriminating statements. The defense further disputed the assertion that Michele had committed the crime or that she was the mastermind behind it. Under Alaska law, if it could be proven that Michele was involved in planning the murder, her actions would legally be considered equivalent to pulling the trigger. Even the attorneys expressed concerns that Michele's past might prevent the jury from recognizing her as the educated wife and mother she had become. Surprisingly, a former dancer who had worked with Michele at a club testified for the prosecution. This witness kept a detailed diary in which she noted the favorite films of her friends and acquaintances. She claimed that Michele was particularly obsessed with the 1994 film, The Last Seduction, a story that paralleled Kent's case. In the movie, the female protagonist manipulates her lover into killing her husband to collect insurance money. The witness asserted that Michele often referred to this film as her favorite, admired the lead character, and aspired to be like her. The defense disputed the testimony, stating that Michele did not have access to a weapon matching the one used in the crime. Additionally, the defense argued that Michele had taken steps to remove herself from Kent's insurance policy shortly before the murder. The prosecution countered this claim, arguing that Michele was not canceling her involvement, but merely clarifying beneficiary details. However, Kent had already changed the beneficiaries before his death, leaving Michele with nothing. During the hearings, Michele remained calm and chose not to testify before the jury, consistently asserting her innocence and claiming she had nothing to hide. The defense presented her husband, Colin, as a key witness to challenge the claim that Michele could be a murderer or the mastermind behind the crime. Colin played a crucial role in defending Michele's character, which the prosecution had tried to tarnish. He shared that, although he was aware of Michele's past work as a stripper, he admired her determination to take that job to pay for college and create a better future for herself. The defense argued that the prosecution's case against Michele relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked any concrete proof. The trial lasted 5 weeks, followed by 2 days of jury deliberation. On October 22, 2007, Michele was convicted of first-degree murder. The verdict was devastating for Michele. Her fiancé Colin and their daughter, Kent's relatives, feel relieved and partially fulfill Kent's last wish before he was killed. Michele's attorney, however, was determined to keep fighting. The defense team filed an appeal, focusing on the missing murder weapon and the questionable evidence used to convict her. The rare weapon, believed to have been used to kill Kent, could potentially exonerate her, but it had not been found even more than a decade after the crime. After John Carlin began serving his sentence, he reportedly admitted to owning a weapon matching the description, a Desert Eagle of the same caliber as the murder weapon. John claimed he had lied earlier out of fear, believing he was being hunted and would be jailed based on his testimony. According to him, his weapon went missing shortly before the crime, but later reappeared. He explained that he had been forced to clean it with a chemical solution to remove fingerprints and then disposed of it by throwing it into a garbage container. All the while, John continues to insist that he did not kill Kent. After the hearings, Michele was sent to a women's prison in Alaska, where she awaited sentencing. She was eventually sentenced to 99 years in prison. During this time, Michele's husband frequently traveled to Alaska to visit her, striving to support both her and their family. 2 years later, Michele's attorney successfully overturned her first-degree murder conviction. A significant development arose when John Carlin, who had been beaten to death in a lodge prison fight in 2008, while his appeal was still pending, became central to the case since Michelle's conviction had been primarily based on John's testimony. The court dismissed the case following his death. This marked a turning point in Michelle's favor. On February 5, 2010, the Alaska Court of Appeals overturned Michelle's conviction. While awaiting a retrial, Michelle was released on $250 bail. During the retrial, the prosecution was prohibited from referencing her previous conviction, the movie, or the victim's letters, as these were deemed speculative. As a result, the case against Michelle began to look much weaker. Kent's parents attended the hearings and were shocked to learn of Michelle's release on December 13, 2011. Anchorage Superior Court Judge Philip Volland dismissed the murder charge against Michelle. Due to the prosecution's inability to prove her guilt, Michelle resumed her life in Washington, where she now runs a laser surgery clinic after John Carlin's death in prison. His son filed a lawsuit against the state of Alaska and received $160 in compensation for his father's death. Kent's father passed away in 2014, but Kent's mother continues to visit Alaska. She considers it the only place where she feels close to her son and remains committed to seeking justice. Each visit, however, reminds her of the guilt she feels for being unable to fulfill Kent's final wish, as described in his letters. In the end, no one was ever held accountable for Kent's murder.